What's up, everybody? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Just want to thank everybody who's been listening, everybody who's been retweeting, sharing, writing me, telling me that they enjoy the show. Anybody who's rated our stuff on iTunes, I really appreciate that too. Nobody knows what the fuck it does, but apparently it helps with just, I guess, the more ratings and comments you have, the more likely people are going to run into it. So I really appreciate that. And just thanks, because our numbers have been consistently growing with downloads and plays and watches and all that stuff. So I just really appreciate everybody who's taking time out of their day to listen to these conversations I put out, and I hope to keep bringing interesting people. I have a bunch of interesting people that I hope are coming up within another couple weeks, and just going to keep popping them out, and every once in a while I'll just get a guest who gets back to me and says, hey, I'll be free next week. So, and then a show just comes out of nowhere. So it's hard to kind of tell you who's the next guest because of the fact that it's kind of so random when people write me back and when they're available. So if you like our Facebook page, if you follow us on Twitter, it's the easiest way to kind of keep up with everything. And also another way of supporting us is my Theory 6 music project. You get a song and you support the show. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. And I do some music that is more trance, EBM, electronica type music, and then I have some more metal music. So if you like either or if you like both, check them out. Right now I have 2 heavy songs called Etzeria and Obsession for Fulfillment that are out that you can get anywhere. And then same thing with the theme song to the podcast called The Ripple Effect. You can find that anywhere. Also, when I say anywhere, I mean Amazon, iTunes, Shazam, anywhere where you can find music, Google Play. And also at the end of this podcast, the reason why I'm doing this intro is to let everybody know that the song is going to be War for Peace. I think that's what the final title I'm going to probably put on it. But either way, it's going to be my next release. And I'm going to put it at the end of this show. It's 99.9% done. You're going to hear basically pretty close, if not the final version at the end of this podcast. And if you like the song, then, follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and once it's out, you'll be able to you'll know, and you'll be able to download it and get it, and also support us. And luckily, all my songs are pretty long, so you get, for 99 cents, you get the most for your money. You get like a 5 or 6 minute song. So definitely do that. And like I said, it's an easy way to support the show. We both win. You get a song, I get I get 99 cents, which isn't a lot, but actually, it's even less after TuneCore gets their cut, but I think it ends up being like 70 cents. But either way, it's a little bit. It helps, and if everybody kind of helps support the show, it helps with paying for the bandwidth and all that other stuff that goes into, and storage and all that other stuff that goes into having a podcast. So thanks again, and enjoy the show. And like I said, at the end of this podcast, don't turn it off. Listen to the song, and then if you like it, then basically just keep a lookout for it, because within a week, the most 2 will be released and it'll be available. So thanks again, guys, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Enjoy the show. Peace. What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Today we got Ben McLeish. He's going to be here to kind of talk about something that we've talked a lot on the episode, but I'm not smart enough to really, I guess, do it justice, I don't think, to explain the Zeitgeist Movement and basically the resource-based economy. And I've done my part to talk about it, but Ben's going to definitely do a better job of explaining it, so people who aren't too familiar with it and just have heard us bring it up numerous of times on the show can kind of get a better understanding of what the purpose is and what exactly the movement's about and whatnot. So I just want to thank Ben for being with us today.
Thank you very much, my transatlantic cousin. I hope you're doing well, sir.
And it's cool to have people with English accents. I have so many foreigners on this show, and it's awesome because I'm a foreigner. So I was born in Portugal, so it's cool to meet people from all over the world, and realize that now with the internet, we kind of can all kind of meet people from all over the world that we wouldn't maybe be able to meet 10, 20 years ago, and connect. So this is awesome. So if people might know you from, you've done some stuff. You've done London Real, which is a familiar podcast, which I'm sure anybody who's in a podcast probably is familiar with. So you've been on there. So definitely check that out. That was an awesome interview. So check that out. He's been on plenty of documentaries. One of Owned and Operated, which I just did a podcast with Relic, the filmmaker of that documentary. So you'll see Ben in that too, and which we just talked about before the show. He actually was familiar with, so that was cool. And you're a part of a book too, the Zeitgeist Movement Defined, which I believe. Is it accurate to say that you guys are giving it out for free or something like that, right? You're not making any profit off it?
Yes, both of those are true, actually. It was first released online for free as a hypertext. So, I mean, you can jump to each section, all the rest of it. That's on the zeitgeistmovement.com main website. And then because it's so huge, it's 340 pages or something, because it's so massive, people also wanted a physical copy of the book. So what we did was we released it at cost. In other words, the what you pay for it is what Amazon or Lulu or whatever demand for the actual binding and shipping of the book, and any marginal cost on top of that would go to the author doesn't exist, basically. So that's an at cost one. And then we also released it as an Kindle ebook just now for the lowest possible amount that there is, which is 99 cents or 70 pence if you're from Britain and want to consider that. So, but if any of that is not interesting at all, then you can read it online for free. What I recommend you do is get the physical copy, read that, and then leave it in a cafe somewhere and let a random person have their life changed.
That's actually a good idea. I'll tell you, I bought the first couple Zeitgeist. Well, the first two I didn't buy moving forward because they're all available online. So I figured instead of letting people borrow the DVD, just to have them go online and just search it and they're on Netflix and whatnot. So you can definitely check those out. Zeitgeist, the movie is the first one. Zeitgeist Addendum's the second one, and then Zeitgeist Moving Forward is the third one and final one. And then Peter Joseph did Culture in Decline, which is also available online. And so definitely check those out. I'll tell you, the people that I have convinced to watch that documentary, they have come to me returning it with like a whole different outlook on life. And they're just like, this movie fucking changed my life, And I know it just sounds pretty crazy to say that, but really, I think there's something about learning, and he put it so well, just learning that maybe everything you've been told has been a lie, I guess, and or at least to the extent that marketing, there's more in the marketing, and the system has all been well mapped out and put together to kind of, I guess benefit the empire or those in power or those privileged, hierarchy, and I think that's kind of a some people. It's almost like finding out that we live in the Matrix, it's one of those things where, and so I think that he did a great job putting that together. I think that I still get a lot of people who have a hard time accepting that. I think that the big issue, and we've talked a lot about it with past guests, the idea, it's hard to talk to people about something that is as big of a deal as, hey, like, there's a huge issue with marketing. There's a huge issue with the stock market. Everything is kind of built against you, and it wasn't just accidental. And it was a well thought out plan to keep those in power. And I've had a lot of people fight back and have a problem. I feel like it's denial of believing or finding out that everything you thought you knew you didn't know. And do you find, as you talk about the Zeitgeist movement, do you have an issue with that? Is that one of the things that, or are you talking to mostly people who get it, and it's more debates about the details about the resource-based economy and if it would work?
Well, it'll be a long answer because you've got quite a few really good points in there. You are right that it's a common effect of being exposed to our materials that it's life-changing. Certainly, my life is completely unrecognizable from what it was 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, 4 years ago when I first really started wrestling with trying to communicate this sort of information. And I saw the films as they came out in 2008 because they were recommended by so many different people. And by definition, when you start questioning the underlying value system of society, by definition, everything changes because everything in your society is governed by an underlying value system that forms everything above it. And I think that's probably why sometimes people come away thinking that our general point is that there are secretive groups of people in power who, if we just beat them and got rid of them, things would somehow change. Really, those groups and those people that we see, that definitely, of course, do exist, are just simply expressions of that value system. What happens is when you have a basic society logic that's founded on might is right and power over other people, and the idea of financial instruments and structures that means that collecting sorry collecting the most will somehow make you more powerful in society, then of course you end up with people who do rather well at that game. It's monopoly in real life. But it's when you can describe that to people rather than the sort of more conspiratorial, let's get Dick Cheney and everything will be fine, kind of thing.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
I think it sort of unlocks the worldview for them. And so that's certainly been one way. I must admit, I've not had the kind of issues that some people have had when trying to communicate the stuff. I think all of my family get it. Most of my friends get it, and the ones that don't aren't vehement about it. And most of the people in the general public have been positive as well, although my reach is very small. I mean, every now and again, YouTube is the best place. I mean, if you mentioned the London Real interview with Brian, I mean, if you read the views under there, it's absolutely hilarious. I mean, these people want to gut me, but that's fine. Of course, that's just YouTube being YouTube,
YouTube,
right?
I don't know. I don't know what it is about YouTube, but they attract the biggest assholes. Like, it's just like, if you think that there's no, like, that there's not cunty people out there, just read YouTube comments. They're the most racist, like, just the worst people. Like, and that's why I say, like, if you're willing to put your shit online, just be prepared for somebody to hate your stuff. And it doesn't mean it sucks. It just means that there's some person who has some interpersonal issues and just take it out on YouTube and go around just spreading their hatred for for everything. And so definitely don't take it personally. I didn't read the comments because I told myself never to read a YouTube comment again because it's such a waste of time. But I guess sometimes it can be entertaining, and every once in a while you kind of find a clever one or whatnot. But yeah, that YouTube thing, I'm sure you did get a lot of stuff. Is that more online and on YouTube? In your personal life, you said you haven't really got too much criticism.
Yeah, I mean, I've had debates with people who entertain completely different worldviews. I mean, there was an exchange I did with an Austrian economist. For anybody who doesn't know what Austrian economics is, it prides itself on basically essentially a stateless financial institution. So the idea that we could have capitalism but no state, so no checks and balances. The man with the biggest private army wins because he'll have obviously satisfied his fellow man in some homoerotic sounding way for the most money that he's produced. That's actually quite a poor description of them. Some of their points are okay, like in abstraction. They talk about, you mentioned Adam Kokesh, they talk about the non-aggression principle. It's a little bit like the chant in the Bible that, thou shalt not kill. It's great, but it's not systemically reinforced. It's just assumed. And they also tend to assume that human beings exercise complete free will, separate from their environment. You just don't get affected by anything, which sort of is belied by all of advertising and all of marketing. Presumably the very tools that they would want to use to their full effect in a stateless, ungoverned market economy. And so we do find that we butt heads the hardest there. But that's mostly down to their particular dispositions. We've tried to engage them nicely, and it doesn't work. So I did have that, and the guy gave up in the end, mostly because, well, I think he was just losing. I mean, you can go and review the arguments yourself if you like. They're fairly easy to find on the Zeitgeist Movement UK.com webpage. I think they're still up there. But anyway, yes, no, it's been all right, actually. I don't get too much hate mail. The hate mail I do get is genuinely hilarious, and I think it's really, really funny. And then we did, almost as a response to this, yesterday, which was April 1st.
Oh,
I'm giving away the date.
I heard it.
You saw it? Yeah, you heard
I
this?
heard it, and I actually got so disappointed because I'm like, I haven't listened to one of your podcasts. Oh, because that's the other thing you do. You do your the Zeitgeist Movement podcast, and
Sure.
I'm like, I haven't heard one in a while, and I'm like, because you don't release them too often, so sometimes I go a while without checking, and I checked, and I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, I'm just about to have Ben on the show, and he completely changed his life views. I'm like, he's supposed to be defending the Zeitgeist Movement, and I'm like, this could not be any worse. Then I'm like, wait. I'm like, it is April Fool's. I'm like, okay, maybe, yeah. And then, yeah, so, but yeah.
It's amazing, like, because I mean, it's actually, if you listen to it, it's really, really obvious that it's a joke from the beginning, because I edit Peter Joseph's recent lecture so that he actually says that Jeff is the leading cause of death on the planet Earth. It's one of the first things that's said. And then we basically immediately bin all science and say that, it's definitely basically just the state. Let's get rid of the state and have a completely free market. Everything will be fine. And let's stop reading peer-reviewed journals because they're state-based. And let's just throw all that out. And it's amazing what happened. And it was really actually Matt Berkowitz, who recorded it with me. He and I had a word about this before. He said, you know that people are going to take this literally. I mean, if we're not careful, if we don't make it absolutely obvious it's a joke. And then we said, well, actually, even if we make it a joke, I reckon that people are just going to jump on the boards and on the forums and start yelling about what idiots we are. And sure enough, it happened from our own membership, exercising their uncritical skills and demonstrating out loud that they sometimes like to judge too quickly. And we will be doing shows on that, by the way. We've got several things upcoming talking about, especially when we're trying to advance a worldview that is systems-based, that is based on the largest amount of data possible, which is the entire world and how it is one system, and how to really thrive on this planet, we have to maximize that system in all possible ways, using the absolute current understandings and preparing ourselves for updating all of those understandings over time. If you're going to do that, then you as an advocate have to exercise the critical thinking capacities and the torrent of information that comes in a very careful, critical way. So even though it was a jokey April 1st podcast, which we want to do because you want to have some fun when you're having activism, you don't want to be too dour and serious, people will stop listening after a while. Even though it did that, it sort of proved an upcoming point that we have about not being a credulous idiot, basically.
Yeah. And but the one thing you said about debating that I wanted to mention was the fact that sometimes you can get in a debate with somebody, and this happened with Stefan Malyihu, or however you pronounce his name, and Peter Joseph. And I've seen a lot of debates with Stefan, and some things he says he's absolutely correct when he talks about the issues with government and whatnot. But he's a very good debater, but he's also very good. Well, the fact is that I think when he debated Peter Joseph, he was better at debating than he was than making a point. And it's I know people who are very good at debating, and they can win a debate without ever actually making more points and making more sense. And I think that's something that people have to be careful about being tricked into. You can be convinced that somebody won a debate, and that means that they made more sense, and that their point and their side, whatever they're I guess trying to the message they're trying to push makes more sense. But it's not always the case. In many cases, there's people who are very intelligent, very well spoken, and very good at debating, and yet can be wrong. And I think that sometimes especially with like libertarians, and I've said this 1,000 times on the show, I agree with libertarians like 99% of the time. I had Eric Draitzer on the last show, and he talked about how same thing. He agrees with libertarians, and then the one thing he really disagrees with them on is the fact that like property rights trumps everything, and he's like, no, human rights trump everything. That's the most important thing. So do you find that when you see people trying to debate the Zeitgeist movement, and we'll have to get into, for people who don't know, what exactly it's about and what exactly it's trying to push for. But really quick on this point, do you find that sometimes people are very good at debating, and then but yet they're not making the most sense?
Yes, but regarding the libertarian point, by the way, I was going to ask you which libertarian you mean, because one of the great switcheroos that's happened in the 20th and 21st century is that the original libertarianism, in other words, that of John Locke and the English tradition, which was led to people like Peter Kropotkin and Murray Bookchin, and essentially comes from Bakunin, if you're going to trace it all the way through politics, is the real libertarianism. That's the stuff about. It still talks about individual liberty, but it also has things to say on ecology and on things like that, and much more to say on property rights, by the way. In fact, they most successfully repudiate the idea of property through Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who I recommend to you. It's spelled Proudhon. So actually the left libertarians, which are the original libertarians, are the ones that you agree with. So you agree with all of the sort of essential the real statelessness, the idea of actually having dominion over other people is not demonstrative. It's not self-justifying. It needs to be proven. Horizontal and more anarchist approach is really what they talk about. And then the right libertarians, which is everything from Friedman onwards, and even I suppose even earlier actually, is the sort of modern American bullshit libertarianism that is actually a front for defending property rights and the rights of corporations. And this is by the way the 21st century paradigm. We've gone through Adam Smith. We've gone through people much earlier than that. The 21st century political discourse is corporations are people too. This is the thing that needs to be defeated. This is the big bullshit thing. And that is, unfortunately, I hate to put them all together in one, that is the modern right libertarian anarcho-capitalist position. And it's completely invented. And it's not to be confused with William Godwin and all of those noble chaps who actually started the real libertarian movement. So I'd advise you, do check those out, because it sounds like you really enjoy their stuff. They also write much more clearly, and they actually use the language properly. Because the point you're making about the idea of debate is that, yes, there is a very good reason why particularly modern libertarians, or modern individualists, I should say, are extremely well versed in logical fallacies, because they love to basically try and hook, line, and sinker every debate, regardless of the content, based on assumed logical fallacies, saying, oh, that's a straw man, oh, that's begging the question. And you'll find, actually, if you take away all of those things, and Stefan's quite good at this, well, he's not quite as bad as some of them. If you actually strip the narrative of that, you would find that they're saying remarkably little. And what they are saying tends to be disguised by how they're trying to undermine your own language. Of course, we should all try and avoid logical fallacies, and we talk about it as well. We've had proper lectures on this stuff in the past from our membership too, and of course it is to be avoided, but it's used as a sort of talisman to disguise a lack of content sometimes. If you want an example of a really good critique that we've received, the critique is by a YouTube channel called Libertarian Socialist Rants, and that's the left libertarian kind, the more anarchist kind. This gentleman, who is irritatingly young, he's 18 years old. Cameron Watts is his name. He's a good friend of ours now. He actually was asked by his viewership, after he'd been talking about the anarchist tradition and all this kind of stuff, anarcho-ecology and things like that. He was asked, what do you think of the Zeitgeist Movement? And instead of just coming out and saying a bunch of bollocks, he did a phenomenal amount of research. He's actually, I would say, judging by his video, which is called The Zeitgeist Movement, a Libertarian Socialist Critique, if you want to bang it up on YouTube, it's highly worth your while. It's less than 14 minutes long. He gets a phenomenal amount of work done, references all his sources, has clearly done his reading of both his stuff and ours, and really coherently puts together suggestions for where we need to focus our efforts, and asks a few things. And then he was decent enough, when we made a very brief response to his video, to come on our show and basically explain his points. We explained ours, and guess what, Ricky? We ended up not shouting at each other, because as loath as we are to admit it, the anarchists are halfway on the way to our argument. They have the right conception of, the stateless society and the general non-dominion of people over each other just for its own sake. And their proprietarian views are in line as well. But they don't go quite far enough. And here, actually, I can segue straight into what the Zeitgeist Movement's about, if you like, because,
please.
And this is something that I said to Cameron as well. I don't think that the basic logic of life on this planet, for example, ants and their colonies and the way that they're organized, is implicitly a political thing. Cameron was saying, why don't we call ourselves left libertarians? Well, the Zeitgeist Movement tries to go even lower than that, if you like, even more towards the fundamentals of how life appears to be organized within our biosphere. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we do actually have a biosphere, regardless of what various bizarre climate deniers will say. The effects that we're having on our environment, or can have on our environment, are detrimental and deleterious to human civilization, and more importantly, the civilization of the ecosystem as well. It's both things, not one or the other. We're not environmentalists in that sense. So this is what we are, essentially. Well, I try not to say we. I try not to represent people who have just signed up to the movement, or who may differ with me in other ways. We are a grassroots organization that's been around since about 2008 explicitly, in reaction to Peter Joseph's first two Zeitgeist films. It's actually in the second one, Zeitgeist Addendum, which explicitly, other than just outlining the problems of political dictatorship, environmental degradation, banking based on nothing but invented perceived value, and a general misalignment of our social operation to what actually matters on the globe, we emerged to basically fight the corner of systems theory and the scientific method applied for human and biological concern on the planet. We are explicitly advocating a train of thought. We're not an institution. We're not a thing. It's like atheism. Atheism isn't a thing. It's like non-tooth fairyism. It's like not collecting stamps. We're advocates for like not collecting stamps, but of the ecological tradition. By joining us, all you do is redouble the efforts of the demands for systems thinking, which is utterly absent from the political discourse. Right and left, in other words, both wings of the business party, as again, Cameron Watt, I find myself quoting our best critiquer yet. There's essentially no difference between them. It's absolutely absent there. There was nothing on the requirements of life on this planet in terms of life systems, be that human, be that ecological in some way, using means of life, the oxygen, the water, all of the great resources of the planet to produce more life. That is something that's become wholly beholden to capital demand. It's not even just capitalism, it's just the demand of money to use life as means to create more money. And that is essentially a damning, cancerous effect of money to more money, just like cancer cells to more cancer cells, using your healthy body, that really does pervade everything. There is nothing in there at all about actual sustainability, actual technical efficiency, getting more out of using less. Right at the moment, we're creating ever so slightly more out of using phenomenally more. And let me underline that point, because people think, oh yeah, we're a bit wasteful and we do have massive tire yards and there are billions of thrown away phones, but it's not that bad. Yes, it is, and I'll tell you why. We mine something like 25 tons of material to get 5 tons of usable material, 90% of which then ends up in waste in 6 weeks. We are living on a landfill. So there's nothing of that in political discourse, and most importantly, there's none of it in economic discourse either. Even if you ignore the politicians and said, hey man, let's just do financial stuff, let's just be, good old capitalists. There's nothing in the capitalist doctrine either which references actual life systems, the fact that we can't keep growing infinitely just using stuff and throwing it away because it's financially rewarding to do so, because you can get people to buy more stuff and it's too expensive to fix stuff or build things properly in the first place. This is our position. This is where we hold the fight. And even though you may be nodding your head in agreement, thinking, oh, this seems pretty obvious and normal, you will find nothing but enemies in this realm when you try and fight this on a systems level. You can explain to people, hey, man, there isn't actually a hunger problem on the planet. There are 7 billion people. We produce enough food for about 10 billion people. There is enough food. But, and they will nod and say, yes, that's true. That's terrible. I can't believe that. And then when you say, well, let's systemically rearrange society so that we solve the problem rather than sending tinned goods to Africa, what could be more insulting than that? What could be more of a non-answer than that? When you start saying, here's the systemic way that we can do it, you will find even people like Jimmy Wales, founder of Wikipedia, man who has to panhandle every couple of months to beg you for donations, as if that's not an example of an effort contrary to the economic paradigm, actually coming out, as he did a few days ago, and saying that we are economically illiterate and that it would lead to totalitarianism just like, quote, all other forms of communism. What is this? I'm glad that he said it in public, and I'm glad that he wrote it down, because future generations, let's hope there are some, I'm pretty sure there will be, I'm actually fairly hopeful about the planet, we'll be able to go back and look at the archive in a way that we can't go back and look at the palimpsests of old historical documents now to laugh at how stupid people used to be. They'll be able to look and say, look, man, even the thought leaders, even the people who were great within their time, even the people who ironically started building the creative sharing commons that led to a society that was really integrated where knowledge was free and open, even those guys didn't get it at the time. That's our position. We do this through films, we do this through books, we do it through talking, we do it through podcasts like the lovely yourself. We do this in all possible ways. We do street activism. We do various lecture days that work a little bit like TED. And most of all, we try and have fun while we're doing it.
Yeah, that's the important part. It's funny you bring that up, because the thing about how much food there is on Earth, because Joe Rogan just had this farmer, and he's a farmer / author / I think he does lectures and stuff like that. And he just said that on his show. And it was, I think, Joe Rogan's his last release. And I can't remember what his name was. But either way, he's like, there's 2 times more edible food out there than humans need. And Joe's like, what? How can that be? And a lot of people assume that because they're starving people that there isn't enough food. But the problem isn't the quantity of food. It's we're not getting it to the people who need it. We're wasteful. And so I think that when you hear that, it sounds crazy, but it absolutely is true. And this is coming from a farmer and author who has nothing to do with the Zeitgeist movement. And, it's just somebody just stating a statistic. So it definitely isn't just coming from the Zeitgeist movement, but you can get this information from plenty of other people. And the environment's a big thing. So I think the important thing to get across to people is, and I've talked a lot about the Zeitgeist Movement on the show, but I haven't really gotten into much detail on it. One, because I think I'll do a really unfair way. I won't express the ideas as well as I think that the Zeitgeist Movement should be expressed, and so people to understand it. But the resource-based economy part, I think that from the beginning of the films, you watch the first Zeitgeist movie and you look at the banking system, and like you said, money is made out of nothing. It's the whole he did on Zeitgeist Addendum, he did a great job for somebody who like myself, who maybe doesn't understand economics very well, and can kind of just watch it and really get a good understanding of how they make money out of nowhere, and basically how the banks, how they have a reserve, and then they can kind of just loan out more money and whatnot. And so if anybody wants to watch, even if you're just interested on how the banking scheme works, just watch the beginning of Zeitgeist Addendum, and it'll really be eye-opening. And so that's really important. But I think when I get in debates with people, I think the biggest thing is not so much selling people the idea that things are fucked up, because I think we all agree that things are fucked up. Even though I think the Zeitgeist Movement and the films, they highlight it a lot better than I think most people understand. I think we all understand, oh yeah, banking's a necessary evil for the way the world works, blah, blah, blah. And really, so we all agree that something's wrong with banking, but the fact that it's a necessary evil, you guys insist that it isn't necessary. And I think that it's hard for people who've been conditioned, and this goes to the nature versus nurture type ideas, and the fact that we've all been conditioned to believe that this is the way the world works, and the only way to fix it is modify the way things are today. Instead of looking at it, let's start it from scratch. Let's just look at all possible ideas. And I think my issue I have when I talk to people about it is that the idea of a resource-based economy, like, it just seems completely unreachable. I think people start thinking of YouTube people who leave comments and they're like, how are you ever going to convince those people, the YouTube comment guys, to live in a resource-based economy? And I think that that's the thing that people have a hard time understanding. And to be the devil's advocate, how would you get somebody, like the rich, greedy people in the world, the YouTube comment guys who are just a-holes and obviously ignorant and don't want to listen to anybody's opinions or perspectives? How would you eventually, I'm guessing it would obviously be a very slow thing, and little by little you change people's consciousness and their way of thinking. But do you think it is possible that in maybe the not so distant future to get that alternative thinking and get out of this mold, break this mold that we're stuck in?
Absolutely. I mean, society has only ever got rid of its old molds. We have shed paradigm after paradigm. We believed in tooth worms for 4,000 years, and then one day someone realized we had no evidence for it. We believed in Calvinism when it suited the economic system, and now we don't. Most of the people who are what I would call aggressive detractors essentially paint this as some kind of violent communist totalitarian nightmare. Why the fuck would I be trying to get a totalitarian communist nightmare in place? It's such a bizarre idea that ordinary human beings who don't have anything to benefit from the Zeitgeist Movement. I'll remind anybody who's listening that I certainly don't get paid for this, and in fact I spend a lot of money doing it, are essentially trying to advocate for the kind of rational system that produces citizens that can't be controlled and coerced the way they are now by the largely weird communist system that they live in and call capitalism. It should start dawning on people when they see the vast degradation of the world and the more and more draconian laws that are put in place to control the population amid worsening and worsening life conditions, whilst all the time the media pumps out the idea that we're doing better and better all the time. And we're becoming less and less violent all the time, instead of just simply reflecting our violence out onto the environment. It should start dawning on people that you live in an extremely coercive system, and a system that dominates you in propagandistic ways that are more invisible to you than you think that they were to the people who actually lived in, what we call communist Russia. Let that sink in. It's quite a terrifying thought to realize that, for example, the BBC in the UK right now are spinning climate reports from the IPCC in ways that make it seem less alarmist than it is. They're basically detracting from the scientific consensus, and yet they call themselves neutral, and yet we all trust them. So it is quite scary, and that people should, really realize what a propagandistic system they live in. Now, I mean, how do you get this stuff spread? And your question about gradualism is an interesting one. Certainly, if we were to implement the technical elements of a resource-based economy tomorrow, that would be, for example, vastly more advanced integrated systems of harnessing energy, like solar roadways, for example, is one of the things that's just out there already that we appropriate as an idea because it's been invented by someone. Solar panels that are on the road, that can display things on the road, that can harvest the energy of the road, all the rest of it. Smart grids that can have energy fed into them from more than just the power stations from the monolithic oil-producing giants of the 19th and 20th century. And essentially assuming that humanity could deal with a massive technical upgrade that would essentially allow access to transport, access to food, access to clothing, access to housing and all the rest of it, and a large scale of automation. So automated cars, automated industry, essentially the replacing of jobs by automation wherever possible, which is within 16% and 70% of necessary jobs. Then you get to ruminate on which jobs we're doing now, which is just complete bullshit, which we don't even need. If we were to do all that tomorrow and then hope that people with their hoarding mentalities that have been imbued by this current system, because the current system requires you to use as much as possible and be a consumer. To be a consumer is essentially it's essentially a verb, to consume. You're an operation. You're a machine of consumption. What a weird idea. If we were to do that, there would be absolute fucking chaos. And we've admitted this over and over and over in our materials. We can't just build it and they will come. And in fact, I'll give you a real life example in a minute of where it has been built and no one has used it. And it's in America, actually. But the whole point is that this is a revolution of values as well as of technical infrastructure. It's not just to build large city systems and hope that people can handle the vast automation and the idea of open, freely available food and freely available housing and all the rest of it. People would hoard in weird kind of ways. In fact, the behavior would seem as aberrant to real adapted people of a resource-based economy as actual hoarders appear to us now. You and I, we just own a few things. Oh, but there's that crazy guy over there who's filled his house up to the brim with old magazines and everything. That's the wrong kind of property. Well, we see the world in that way, except it's us, you and me, quote, normally using stuff that we find to be phenomenally hoarding and scary and weird. George Carlin once said it really well. He said that essentially houses are just boxes where we keep stuff. We have to move them around because we have all this stuff that we're lugging around because this idea of property rights, the idea that this somehow makes your life better, when in fact you could create almost a library for humanity, which is obviously not just one library. It would be, it's almost a little bit like, I'm drawn to the notion of hotels. I come here and I use the phone. It's not my phone, but it's here, and there's a bed. I don't drag my bed and phone to every new hotel. This would be mad. But at the moment, we see that madness in ordinary property behaviors. So absolutely, the idea of doing this tomorrow, no, humanity's not ready. How could it be? We're still supporting the current system. Now, the idea that the idea we should just build a test city and it would come, or just make it, create the infrastructure that could do this stuff and then it'll be fine. Let me give you an example from California. I was reviewing this again recently because I keep hearing the bleats of people saying, people should just prove the case and then it'll be fine. Well, ladies and gentlemen, California is the breadbasket of the USA. You may not know that. People are conditioned to believe that peaches are from Georgia, potatoes are from Idaho, blah, 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 blah. It's not true. 2 out of every 3 meals in the whole of the United States come from and are grown in California. And the Shasta Dam, which is up near Mount Shasta in Northern California, not too far away from Redding. I visited this last March. Is a marvel of human engineering. It was built during the Second World War. It was completed just in, I think it was like 1980. It took a long time to finally settle. And it's essentially a hydroelectric dam. It does a few things. It supports the agriculture further down, all the way down to South California through very, very careful irrigation practices. It obviously prevents flooding, and flooding happens in California. Not at the moment. Of course, you guys have a bit of a drought going on there, which is something you can also consider as an environmental deleterious effect. And of course, it's also hydroelectric, so it produces electricity. In fact, it has 5 huge generators that are multiple stories high, each of which, when switched on for 24 hours, can generate enough electricity to power Dayton, Ohio for a month. Now, imagine switching all 5 on and feeding that into the system and feeding California's energy requirements. Energy requirements that, I will remind you, in the 90s were a problem with brownouts and blackouts due to proven mishandling by the energy systems, as demonstrated so wonderfully by one of your greatest journalists and one of the greatest journalists in the world for at least the problems, not so much for the solution, Greg Palast. You want more on that? He actually wrote a book with I've forgotten his name now. There's a couple of them called I think it's Free Market and it's something about Democracy and Regulation. It's called with Gerald Oppenheimer. That's his name. This was proven. So in other words, in a state in America where there has been deliberate shutting off of the power to jack the prices up, there has been a hydroelectric dam that could deal with producing for free huge amounts of clean energy. And guess what? They don't use it. And when I asked them, why don't you, instead of selling this as a commodity and switching it on in dribs and drabs and keeping it scarce so that it's valuable in a restrictive society where limitation equals pay to play, why don't you just, not flood the system, but really augment the system with clean energy tomorrow? He said, the man who is from Homeland Security, by the way, it is a government institution. It's the only government institution, by the way, that turns a profit. He said, no, because we live in a market economy and energy is a commodity. Could you have any better admission that the current system is complete bullshit when the breadbasket of the USA, which is undergoing a drought, will not use the one thing that a drought could be helped by, which is water, in a sensible way, using infrastructure that is already been built and is not being used because of the market system. And add to that fracking, which is the process of pumping a load of vile chemicals with a load of diesel oil into shale deposits to blow them up and cause earthquakes. That's proven by scientific documents, by the way. This is now being put in California. And what are they doing? They're pumping up the water afterwards, running it through a cleaning process, and then putting it on the crops. Do you see now that this system is literally cancerous, and that even if the infrastructure is there, if the values are not updated, it doesn't matter. You will not use it. People will continue to behave in their bizarre, pseudo-individualistic ways to the detriment, unfortunately, of the human family as a whole.
Yeah, and you hit on a lot of good topics and good points, and you're absolutely right. And it gets right down to the root of the issue. I think we have to look at capitalism, and we have to say that it didn't work, or at least it's on the way of possibly, committing suicide to this earth. Because you look at it, we can't just keep raping resources until they run out, and then move on to another resource. Then and then they run out, and then another resource, and it's like how often we're going to do that. You look at two actually recent examples that make the point. They're looking for the plane, the Malaysian plane, and obviously CNN's been just using it for ratings for the last 2 weeks. But either way, they keep searching for stuff, and they keep finding debris in the oceans. And it's like, I'm glad they're highlighting the fact that there's so much crap in our oceans. And it shows, a lot of people have gone up to me and they're like, can you believe how much junk's in our ocean? I'm like, yeah, I can actually, I know people who are in the Navy who talk about, they would just throw things over the, in the ocean, just trash, or like a fridge, they would throw, because they're in the middle of the, the ocean, and nobody's going to find it. And obviously they're not going to get a ticket for littering or whatnot. So what are they worried about? And then you look at the GM scandal recently, the issue with the Cobalt and the G5 and a bunch of the cars that they made, that basically they knew that they should have recalled them. And I think 18 deaths, I believe, are linked to this recall. And a bunch of people looked at numbers. They look at, everything's a statistic. They looked at numbers, and they said it's not a good business decision to recall, to recall these vehicles. So what ends up happening? Time goes by. 11 to 18 people could be alive right now if it wasn't for them picking up, or making the moral decision and not the financial decision. So, I mean, regardless of what people think of the Zeitgeist Movement, we have to look at the root of the issue. And the root of the issue is that the capitalism type of outlook doesn't work. It doesn't work if you care about the environment. It doesn't work if you care about your grandkids and your grandkids. It works if you just care about quick gains, quick profits, and fuck everything else, and let it be their issue. Like you said, you talked about climate change. I don't know how much more debate I'm going to hear about this, because it's insane how many people are still deniers of it. And it's just like, you have to be naive and ignorant to believe that all the things that, we burn, all the factories, cars, planes, they have no effect on the earth. It's insane. I've heard Shane Smith from Vice.com talk about it recently, and he gets pretty, he gets worked up over it, because he's seen the glaciers melt. He's talked to the scientists, and he's just like, it's insane, because he's like, for the most part, 90% of the scientists agree, and the ones that don't agree either don't specialize in that field, or a lot of times are getting paid off to kind of push the other point of view. So I think we have to look at things and say, hey, the way things work right now, it eventually it's going to catch up to us. And can we reverse what we've already done? Probably not, but we can slow it down. And like you said, there's all these great technologies out there. I know that I saw a TED talk about thurium, or I'm probably saying it wrong. That the alternative for energy. I know I've heard people. I think it was on somebody said at Z-Day they had some like 16 or 17-year-old kid who had some idea on what to do with nuclear waste and to use it for energy. Because right now, what do we do with don't we just like basically bury nuclear waste and then just leave it there?
That's exactly right. It's what we do. Yeah, we it's out of sight, out of mind, which is the model for any system. By the way, if people don't like the fact we're saying capitalism, any system which prefers market operation over sustainable operation of life systems on the planet. I'll put it that way. Keep coming back to that. Doesn't matter if it's communism, capitalism. They'll all fail if they don't understand their environmental consequences and the requirements and value of that environment, and the fact that you are not separate from it. By the way, you as a human being and I as a human being, we can't assert individualism in this world. And I'll give you two different reasons, the macro and the micro, if you like. On the micro level, for every one human cell that you have 10 microbes. In other words, you are not really here. You're not really listening to this podcast. Most of you is not you. In fact, most of you is other things pretending to be you. They're along for the ride. You are a system. Start acting like it. Now, on the macro level, we find that when we watch astronauts go out into space and then look down, they experience something which has been termed the overview effect, where they see the tiny window of the world against all that blackness, that what Carl Sagan called the pale blue dot. The last thing that the Voyager saw as it looked back, as before it shot out into the universe, this tiny spot. Al Gore calls it our only home. And they see this and they suddenly realize how petty and how small-minded and ridiculous the idea of nation states and politicians and single issue anything is. This is a life system that you're part of, and it looks amazing from above. And they come back down wanting to drag every politician up and say, look at that, you son of a bitch. That's a direct quotation. And realize your place in the world. Now, don't be too hard on yourself. The system is designed with that in mind so that you don't get the overview effect. It's designed to compartmentalize and to divide and instill fear and stop logical trains of thought from reaching their consequence. In fact, I'll give you an example that's been talked about on this podcast a few times. And by the way, I want to congratulate you and the guests you've had. Every time you've mentioned Zeitgeist, or they have mentioned Zeitgeist, it's been absolutely correct. It's so refreshing to hear people actually talk about it correctly. I don't have to correct any of your stuff. But I'll give you an example where you at least twice have mentioned this, and don't worry, everybody does this, and I used to do it as well. It's the gun control thing. So there's the idea on one side that we should ban guns, or make it just legal, stop the legal back channels, really hammer down on this. On the other side, people like Alex Jones and whatever incoherently babble that we should have more guns to fight the people with guns. May I suggest to you, as a snotty Englander, and every American's probably literally reloading right now for when they next see me, may I suggest to you that actually the answer is neither of those things. And if we were to apply the behaviors that the Zeitgeist Movement members tend to have to these issues, let's break it down. So last year you had about 31,000 deaths in the US from handguns. Now, the way that those figures break down is really important. 600 were accidents, and 19,000 were suicides. Two-thirds. Two-thirds, in other words, were not aggressive actions against other people. And if you add those to the accidents, you get a massive majority. So do you understand what I mean when I say that the problem with, quote, gun control is neither a left or a right issue, or even worse, as you have suggested sometimes in a bid to be very decent to both sides, somewhere in the middle? It's actually the realization that societal stress, which is huge in the States, and it comes from all kinds of places. It comes from the way that you're hounded at work to chase numbers which mean nothing. It's the idea that you're part of an underclass that will never be the 1%, and the 1% are vanishing into the distance, and the shame you feel and the deprivation you feel from that, and the anger that comes from that, and the fury and the self-denigration that comes from that. That's the problem. And you fix that by fixing the idea of benefits of inequality to begin with, not by redistributing wealth, but by designing as a system and demanding that people understand their place within a system that should absolutely have to take care of everyone. Because guess what? When you actually do that in a way that uses less resources, produces a better life, even for the 1%, by the way, who are still breathing the cancerous air, the inferior products that still die in car accidents, if you do that and improve everybody's lot and actually do it correctly, you solve the gun problem as a byproduct. You end up dropping at least two-thirds if people no longer blow their fucking brains out to get out of this system through debt pressures or what else. So that's the kind of attitude that we take towards things. And it is the long view, and it does seem distant to people because it's not something you can vote for in the next month. It's not a nice short bumper sticker campaign that you can just stick onto your bumper sticker and on the back of your car and just stop thinking about it and hoping that other people will stick that same bumper sticker on. It's not a soundbite. No, it isn't. Sorry. The fact that we're having increasing problems with attention deficit disorder is a natural byproduct of a society that doesn't want you to think, that doesn't want you to concentrate for long enough, and it demands you have a short memory so that they can keep getting away with the massive cycle. And I say they, I do mean the values, not the people. It's the people are just informed by the values. So this is a long game, unfortunately, and it does take some thinking, and it makes us seem over academic, and it makes us seem distant from the issues because we're not a charity. And even though we do charitable stuff, it's not the answer because that's still within the system. So there is a sort of a long ramble that I hope has somehow helped.
Yeah, no, definitely. At first, thanks for saying that any dumb way I try to explain the Zeitgeist Movement actually made sense. I appreciate that. I do my best to try to, I guess, if anything, just plant the seed and hopefully people go out and Google some stuff and then research, some things that we talk about on this on this podcast. But on the gun issue, yeah, I definitely agree. I think that a huge problem with society today is the fact that we look at somebody who works, their whole lives to barely, survive. And then, they pay their bills and have enough money to feed their kids, and then they die. And that's a proud way of living their lives. And I feel like humans have proven they're capable of so much more. And I remember when I had Douglas Ruskoff on a long time ago, it was like last year sometime, and we talked about the idea of having things automated. And I think Jacques Fresco's talked about it, the idea of having humans do the boring, labor-intensive bullshit work that humans, don't have to do anymore. And then we have more time to think and grow. And really, isn't that what happened in the beginning of civilization? I mean, I'm assuming that's what happened. I mean, at first we were monkeys and we were whatever, and we're hunter-gatherers, and we didn't have a lot of free time. And as we created more tools and better technology to have more free time, I'm assuming that's when people started doing more thinking. We had more time to think and come up with ideas and philosophies, and that's when that progression really blew up, the thinking progression, the progression of thinking, I should say. And so I think that we kept going, and some point in our history, it stopped, and things, instead of creating technology to make our lives easier, we created technology for, the sell. We created materialism. We created, what do you think happened? What do you think happened through that history? Do you agree that that's kind of, we were going in the right direction to some point, and then eventually things started going in the wrong direction? And what do you, if you do agree, then what do you think caused that?
It's, I think you are correct, by the way, and I've heard that this line of reasoning, at least from Alan Watts and a few other people, that we started to do our more contemplative and more abstract thinking once we had managed to get outside of the immediate situation of our environment. I mean, just imagine what it must have been like to see, or to live through volcanic eruptions and to have absolutely no methods of coping with it because we just didn't have anything in terms of technology. Technology, by the way, all that means, that word, is applied knowledge. And you actually see this in animals. By the way, careful to say that we evolved from monkeys. That's not actually correct. Monkeys and us evolved from a common ancestor. This is a
Yeah.
reason why
I'm sorry.
many of your countrymen seem to believe in that evolution is just invented by scientists because we somehow evolved from monkeys. But I know you know that.
Yeah. But I'm glad you
you,
clarified that, because I think that I when you say it in that manner, I think it's what, like you said, I think a lot of people use that as, oh, we didn't come from monkeys. That sounds insane. Even though there's a lot of examples of other animals that, I mean, I always use a common example of, just look at dogs. I'm like, every domestic dog came from some type of wolf species, and now we have all these variations of it. So we have more common examples of it. So yeah, but I'm glad you clarified that, because I probably have said that a few times on this podcast without ever really explaining it. So
Sure. I mean, but we can see animals using technology for their own ends at the moment. I'll give you a comedic example that proves that this happens in the modern day. There is a bird I believe it's in India. It doesn't matter where it is. You'll find that they do them everywhere where it's needed, which has learned that to crack a nut that it normally takes quite a long time to crack with its beak and a stone can be cracked much quicker if it's dropped onto a level crossing, where cars then run over it. And then, of course, when the light goes red and stops the cars, the bird comes and picks up its food. So essentially, we have birds using cars, but they're using cars in a way that's different to us. But they're using them to save labor. And the great ironic thing is that, of course, until now, the progression has been that we've managed to save labor in really horrifying places like agriculture that was so vicious. But there's a really, really good podcast on this from the Sea Realm at the moment, by KMO. Sea Realm is worth looking at. It's the most recent one. I think it's called Distinguishing Collapse from something else. You'll find it. It came out last week, and they talk about how agriculture was essentially so awful and so painful and was so demanding physically that it was the site of the first real automation, which has happened in the last century and a half. I mean, it's happened twice, of course, multiple agricultural revolutions. And then the other side of that is it actually probably created the market economy to some extent, because you would probably pay people to do the job for you. But what has happened until now has been that very slow grind of automation over time. And we've now got to the point that was heralded a long time ago, but the predictions of which have been wrong until now. That we are actually getting to the point where we can really automate to the point of extreme human non-involvement. I mean, agriculture is down to less than 2% of the population working in it now. It used to be almost everybody. And we've sort of gradually moved over to the service industry. But as AI has started to make leaps and bounds coming forwards, that's already being taken over as well. I mean, any time that I ring a big company, I'm talking to mostly a robot and and not to a human being. Something that, by the way, would have seemed utopian to anybody from the 1970s or before. It's not utopian now. Now it's normal. In fact, Ray Kurzweil describes this really well. He says that people get used to technology in dismissive ways, and that's what makes the incredulity of the future outlast the amazing leaps and bounds that we've done that would have proven that incredulity wrong over and over again. When a technology first comes out, essentially people say, well, it doesn't work very well, so that'll never happen. And then when it's perfected, I'll give you the example of voice recognition. Siri works almost perfectly for what it's designed to do. Once that then comes out, people are like, oh yeah, we've had that for ages.
Yeah.
So it's this wonderful doublethink. So we are incredibly radical when it comes to just adopting amazing new technologies, but we don't think about their benefits. We don't think about their implications, and we don't apply what we've learned about the fact that more and more impossible things have been made possible to the future, and still consider any sort of material improvements to be utterly impossible. And this is the best system we've ever had, just like every other system that we had before that was also the best system that we had until it wasn't. So yeah, that's how I see it. That's how I see the pattern in general. But I have on my list The World Until Yesterday and Guns, Germs and Steel and Collapse by a gentleman whose name escapes me presently.
Collapse, the movie, Michael Rupert?
Not Rupert, no. This is... You can edit this, I'm sure. Let me go and find it now. Otherwise, it sounds ridiculous that I've got this on my list. Um, he won a Pulitzer Prize for this as well, and I know his name on any good day.
It's a book.
Yeah, Guns German. Hang on, you'll know. You will actually know his. Here it is. You'll know his name. I'll pause. Okay, there it is. I'll try and pause so you can edit properly.
Yeah, no, don't worry about it. No,
I have on my list actually at the moment Guns, Germs and Steel and The World Until Yesterday by Jared Diamond, and also several books on revolution, because this is the next bit I want to really delve into is exactly in which order and how societies have adapted and maladapted to the technologies that they have, and whether revolutions that have occurred, whether it be the sort of bloodthirsty ones like the 1789 French Revolution or the multiple revolutions in Russia, have actually been revolutions, or whether they've just been actually just reassertions by the same ownership classes over essentially warring factions of it or not, and to try and tie those together and understand this progression a little bit, because I have a sneaking suspicion, at least from what I've read at the moment, that we've never really deviated from the same path, and we've essentially been doing mostly the wrong thing for a very long time. Although I think, if you really consider the Neolithic Revolution and things like that, we had to go through essentially all the terrifying things that we went through because there was no cleverer way of doing it. We had to slowly become informed about science. We had to slowly shed our bizarre predispositions that, if we didn't sacrifice a human every day, the sun wouldn't come up. We've had to learn our way out of that and realize that it's bullshit. And more importantly, learn how to know about that, essentially birthing the scientific method. I think it was pretty much unavoidable, unfortunately. But isn't it wonderful that we now face, amid all the myriad problems that we actually have the actual tools to do something about it? This is phenomenal. It's probably the first time in history that we've been faced with a really like a multi-level, collapse and challenge of the future coming up. But we do have stuff that we can use rather than just prayer and incantation and the bleating and wailing to an empty sky.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that we're capable of the technology where we could live in a world where everybody picks 2 weeks out of the year to work and everything else would be automated, and then people the idea of, and also wanting things, people are just like, oh, how could we not work, how could we, who has to build all this stuff. We're very materialistic, but it was by design. It was, people have convinced us to buy things because it makes us feel good, not because we need it. I think people confuse want and need, and there's not much that we need, and there's a lot that we want. And most of our lives, we're working our asses off to buy shit we don't need, to just, and then create this debt to afford these things we don't need, and then we're miserable because we end up being a slave. Well, at least by labor, we're a slave with our labor. We're a slave to this corporate machine. To make them rich, we have to sell our labor, and just to buy stuff we don't need. So it is, and this goes back to the gun issue. You're absolutely right. People are just a big part of suicide's a big part of materialism. I think materialism's a big part of it is because people are depressed, people are unhappy. Instead of doing things that are fulfill them, we spend too much time just buying shit which doesn't fulfill you, and then we end up buying stuff to make up for the emptiness we have of maybe living a life that we don't feel like has a purpose or is really doing anything more important in the world. And so I think all those things go hand in hand. I think that we've been taught to be okay with, living it's okay to just work your whole life and die, and that's it. And I feel like, we're capable of more, we can do more. And if our focus was on, like I said, I think it was Jacques Fresco who said, have the machines do the boring work, we could focus on innovation and technology. Really, we could really advance this world, and there's tons of things out there. I think I was reading about Slingshot, some company called Slingshot that can make gallons and gallons of clean water from any water source, daily, and in 2020, there's like 70% of the world's going to have the internet, and have at least they're going to have the internet in some sense, either through a cell phone or whatnot, and that just means free information. And we don't realize, so the idea of a resource-based economy, the idea that things will be free, and it sounds insane, but today more than ever in history, things are free. I mean, we don't pay for information. We don't pay for, if I don't know how to tie my tie, I can YouTube it. I can, if I don't know how to cook something, I can, Google it or whatnot. So I think that we could live in a world like that, an open source type of thinking world where we don't actually need to own anything and things are just free and nobody has to make a profit off it. But that type of, and this goes to the root of the issue of the fact that a lot of the reason why we believe that, it would never work is because I'm guessing the ones in power want us to believe that. Don't you think?
It's certainly in the interests of the general values of power that abundance be avoided at all costs, yes. Slingshot, by the way, is absolutely amazing, as is all of the stuff that's coming out. There was a book that was released on the 1st of April, that's an unfortunate date, called The Zero Marginal Cost Society by Jeremy Rifkin. I'm about 70-odd pages in. And anybody who doubts the idea that we're on our way to a society that behaves without borders, that where actually the idea of a country is only a limitation and a detriment to the emerging systems we have, should start reading that book. Rifkin, who is an economic advisor to the EU at least, and many other places, has tried to make San Antonio in the States be a third industrial revolution city. In other words, decentralized energy, decentralized production, 3D printing, things like this, things that actually speak against the centralized capitalistic structures of the 19th century and the 20th century, which he argues actually were required. I'm not a snarling anti-capitalist in that sense. I think, agree with him that the big tycoons that came out and produced the railroads and the telegraph system and pursued at huge cost, personal and all the rest of it, the oil fields, they were required. You couldn't do it in a group crowdsourced way. We just didn't have the structures for it. And so in a way, it was useful that they built all those structures that we're now going to totally take and co-opt for a decentralized, non-top-down, non-hierarchical, non-school system produced workforce for the future. I was recently actually doing one of my latest talks in front of a group of futurists. And one guy said, it's very obvious you've got a problem against capitalism, problem with the oil industry, which is not true at all. He'd not been listening to what I was saying at all. I was saying that these things are organized hierarchically and centrally. And that model, the model of central anything, whether it's government, whether it's money, whether it's energy, is the problem, is what is now creating the phenomenal nation state wars and all the rest of it, and the misalignment with the singular systems of the earth. If the internet were country-based and you had to log in to Switzerland's internet, and then from there, if you wanted to access a site that was hosted in Sweden, to log into that, people would revolt overnight. They hate the idea of countries in actual practice. In abstraction, they still think it's they still are in love with it. And by the way, you said you were born in Portugal. I was born in Germany. In fact, I wasn't. I was born in West Germany, which no longer exists. And I moved to the UK in 1989, the very date of the vendor, as they call it, when the wall came down. And when you see those amazing, heart-wrenching moments where the East and the West unite, they run towards each other. Tell me that human beings don't want to be part of a singular collective. What a load of bullshit. Look at the great fights against totalitarianism. What happens when you divide people down an iron curtain for long enough? They run and throw their arms around each other the first moment they get. What are you talking about? But having lived in Germany and having lived in Britain and having spent a lot of my time traveling Europe, I don't have a nationality. In fact, I've recently realized that I probably would call myself European before I call myself anything else. Not in line with the EU or any of that stuff, because that's also deeply flawed too. But just because I love belonging to at least 26 cultures, and I can move within them freely. It's like you and your 50 states, which are all very, very different. Okay, you all speak the same language, and you all have the same burger chains.
We don't. Have you been to the
phenomenal?
Have you been to the South? Not everybody speaks the same language.
Nicely done. That is true. I'll pick up whatever thread I'm saying. Yes, sorry. Rifkin's book. The great enrichment to society will be the turning points of decentralized energy, of the Internet of Things. In other words, the remote knowledge about your health, the tying together with when your fridge is empty with when it should be restocked, so it happens for you and you're not dragging things down the road and driving your car so very much to a lit and cooled and hydrocarbon powered supermarket with cooled meats that have been made in intense hydrocarbon using factory farms. All this stuff is going to be resolved through technical means and not through voting for some idiot who's then going to go back on his word and pander to the business party once again. This is the liberation. And it's what people happily adopt. Even the greatest, in fact, this is an argument I made with the Austrian economist who attempted to debate me. For a start, he asked for, I sent him free copies of the books that I was going to talk about, and then I bought the books that he had. In other words, he took the free stuff and I paid. That's the opposite. And then he happily decried about, the idea of what he called central planning, the idea that there's this overarching system that controls everything and that is coercive because it's been designed without your input. I did point out to him and to everybody who's reading that he had just written that on the internet. And the internet is, by definition, centrally planned in the sense that it has relays, and it has common technology, and it has common protocols. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. There are shared protocols. That's what makes it a system. If that didn't work, you would have to be a phenomenal coder to fix loads of stuff. Things wouldn't work properly, and you wouldn't be able to access all kinds of websites, and the information that came back would be unintelligible, and there are these standards in place to make it work. And all we're talking about is essentially applying the logic of the internet as an end-to-end open system where innovation can happen from you, sir, or from myself, or from anybody who cares to do so, that can be then fed back into the system that enriches the experience and the overall running of that system. That's why people like the EFF fight against net neutrality, which is, by the way, the death of the internet, if that happens. And that's why people like Edward Snowden, who, no matter what you think of him, is correct when what he does as his life function is to bleed out all the amazing stuff that has come out in those leaks against the interests of corporate power and, contrary to all the conspiracy theorists out there, to some extent, for the first time, with verifiable information, to show you what is being done, to show you what living in an open society actually means. Look at what happens when this stuff is available to you. Hey, we can suddenly organize against these leaders. Hey, guess what? Loads of people are creating really good cryptographic alternatives now based as a reaction on understanding the problem, which is that the internet is, for all of its great stuff and all of its common structures, has been phenomenally open-ended. And if we're going to adapt it to deal with the still traditional top-down power that finds threat in this decentralized system, that allows people to talk to each other in different countries, that allows the digital Berlin Wall to fall, then we do have to, design it to still be end-to-end, still be open to people, still be available without that stuff, but to essentially almost be an immune system against that kind of power structure. People love that then. They don't want the government in their internet. And when they realize that that's a systems approach, that is a tangible technical solution, then I think they're on the way to then going a little bit further and going, well, what does this mean with money? What does it mean, for example, let's create a decentralized currency so that we can give to WikiLeaks again while we still need money. Of course, I still think that one of the easiest ways to prove that even if you decentralize money, you'd end up with a libertarian nightmare is to just look at the history of Bitcoin and everything that's happened. But, people are on their way to understanding that all we are advocating is the technical resolution of these problems, which actually gets rid of this whole top-down hierarchical political bullshit anyway, which I think is, as I said on my RT interview, I think that voting for people is actually an act of irrationality. It's an act of complete madness to go, him over there, and pointing at a human being with a brain that was poorly evolved and that isn't even in any kind of situation to technically address the problems that really do face us.
Yeah. I think the important point that you made about borders and stuff like that, I think that's we don't realize that as much as we're proud of our nationalities and stuff like, and I'm born in Portugal. I was raised, eating Portuguese food and speaking the language, and I love being, being able to communicate with people who speak Portuguese and whatnot. But at the end of the day, if we all spoke one language and we all, didn't have nationalities, tradition can be created just in a sense of, just me and my wife could, I'm not married, but if I had a wife and I was married, we could create our own traditions and we could enjoy those. So we don't necessarily need borders and nationalities and stuff like that. And I think what ends up happening with creating nationalities and borders and all that stuff is that you end up creating teams, you end up creating sides, and then, there's nothing wrong with, nationalism, I guess, to an extent, but it also, it's easy to turn one group of people against another group of people. And I think deep inside, we really aren't these, what people assume, kill first, bound to survive, our one instinct is to survive type thing. I think caring for others is also a very strong instinct that we kind of ignore. And I think that it's important to kind of realize that, all these other things just separate us. And if you see somebody in danger, if you see somebody who needs help, your first instinct is to help. You don't care about their political views or what country they're from, or or whatnot. And so it's very important to remember that. And I think I know people who are very mixed, and actually I think that eventually we're going to have, as transportation gets cheaper and more people travel, you're going to see more and more combinations of nationalities and skin colors, and I think people are going to probably not care so much about what nationality they are or whatnot. So I think that that's probably the direction we're going to. But I think that borders and flags and all that stuff, and to actually, I've quoted Enter Shikari, who I believe was at Z-Day, right, where they have been. The UK ban.
I was actually about to quote it back at you. Fuck all borders and fuck all boundaries, fuck all flags and fuck nationalities. Yes. Yeah. Enter Shikari, a wonderful influence on us, and of course we on them as well. And yes, Rao Reynolds, their singer, was our final speaker at Z-Day 2014. He was wonderful as well. He was really good. Anybody who wants to see that, by the way, there is a SoundCloud account called TZM Official Channel, which we put the audio up there. But for the full effect, there is a video online if you just search it, Rao from Enter Shikari, Z-Day 2014, and watch him do it. I think he might even be editing it again himself. He just wrote to me today, actually, and said that he wanted to see the footage because he wanted, I think, and edit his own Prezi into it. He has a really cool presentation program called Prezi. But it's really, really good. And I tell you what, it's really great to have people who fight your corner, who are famous, who you didn't approach. I've always been very wary of people in our movement who say, we need to contact these people. And I've actually never done that. And I think it's a really poor idea. The people who do support our movement, like the lovely Michelle Rodriguez or Woody Harrelson, or any of these people, have been people who have found the information themselves and not people that we've lobbied for. That's what the Church of Scientology does. With church, I just did scare quotes for church because they're not a church. You do not try and get people who are famous and use their currency to promote something that they may not have thought about already. And by the way, you had the chap from Ethos on. Ethos does, of course, make use directly of Zeitgeist Addendum footage, and of course of Mr. Harrelson himself. So this is how this happens. The general effect of changing the zeitgeist, which I should have defined right at the beginning, is a German word as well, meaning literally time ghost, Zeit and Geist, but of course it means the spirit of the age. The general dogmas, the paradigms that we find ourselves in, that we find to be normal. It's normal to have an infinite growth economy. It's always been that way because I was born into it. The general changing of that zeitgeist, of the underlying value structure of society, that which is assumed, that which is taken to be normal, doesn't happen when a group like us says, we need to change this and everybody join us. That's not quite right. We'd like people to join us purely because it helps to disseminate information, but they don't have to. I mean, I find that people who do this independently are very successful at doing it. I mean, is the guy who used Zeitgeist stuff for Ethos part of the Zeitgeist movement? Is Miles Dyer, who's a UK YouTuber, who's now going to work for The Guardian as their head of digital media. He's done a presentation for us before, and he likes our stuff, and he's talked to us and been to our meeting. Is he a movement member? Probably not, really. I mean, he said he actually left the movement to basically impact the world with the stuff the movement talks about. We're not a club. I come back to that idea of the anti-institution again. It's just a reference entity for the effects. And the way that this happened is, in part, invisible, is almost through the back door, is when people start essentially really understanding the values for themselves without having to wave a fucking flag about it, to come back to Shikari.
Yeah, and Pete McGrain, the guy from who did Ethos, that was cool of Woody to I was talking to him. I don't know if it was on air or when we started recording, about the idea that he did the documentary first, then Woody, I think he really was inspired by it or really wanted to be a part of it, and it's cool to have that that just celebrity firepower of just getting attention to something that is that important. So it's not so much about the fact that, hey, I have a celebrity in my movie. It's more about the fact that now maybe with this person who's well known in my film, I can get the message across to more people and get more attention. I mean, I recommend that movie to a lot of people, and usually they don't seem that interested until I'm like, oh yeah, and Woody Harrelson's in it. He's the narrator or the host or
Yeah.
whatnot. People are like, oh, Woody's in it. Oh, I'll check it out. I love Woody, and I'm like, you know what? If it gets the point across, then why not? I do the same thing with Enter Shikari. I'm actually wearing an Enter Shikari shirt right now, but I've seen him live quite a few times, and I live in Massachusetts, and the last time I saw him, I was in Worcester, and at this place, the Palladium, and we were there, and I was talking to him after the show, and we were talking a little bit about the Zeitgeist Movement, because I remember seeing in the CD them referencing it, and then their website talking about it and stuff, and I was a fan already of the band, and I was already a fan of the Zeitgeist movies, so I'm just like, oh, that's awesome, because, I love political bands, and I love music, or either celebrity or music or any way of getting the message across to people who wouldn't necessarily be looking for that type of message, and maybe open their eyes. Another really good band, I don't know if you're familiar with the Architects. They're from the UK.
Oh, they're great. Yeah, I was listening to them today.
Oh, their new album is awesome. What is
Yeah, it is.
Lost
It's
Forever,
really
Lost, however it is. But yeah, I just got it. It's awesome. Low Key's a rapper from the UK that I used to listen to a lot, who actually is on hiatus now, but he was another rapper that talked a lot about, he had the popular song Abomination, which got a lot of attention. But, it seems like a lot of good, and actually I've been trying to get Enter Shikari and 1 Minute Silence, or I don't know if they're still going to be on, but last time I talked to them, there was a band that I grew up listening to. They're from Ireland, who was very politically driven and whatnot, and but that's from when I was growing up back, when I was in my teens. I was a big fan of theirs. But it seems like a lot of good political bands and bands with messages come from the UK. What do you think that is? Is it just because of the fact that there isn't boundaries and you can travel, so you meet a lot of people from other countries, you learn a lot about history and whatnot, and then it seems like because of that, you end up, I don't know, just being more politically motivated to kind of, I guess, get a message across or more into politics? Because I know that's what Pete McGrain said about the filmmaker from Ethos. He was talking about just being Irish. Just, obviously they've had a lot of issues there in Ireland, and a lot of political issues, and they're very politically separated with and religiously separated with the so that it was hard to be Irish and not have some type of political opinion. So, but is that something that is common in the UK, or am I just doing a bad job finding political music in the US? Because it seems like all the good current political music is coming out of the UK or Europe.
Well, I'll return that compliment by saying that some of the best and most heartfelt and powerfully thought out stand-up comedy is coming from the US. I've been a Doug Stanhope fan for at least 12 years. I saw him in 2002 before he was famous. And I knew right away it was love at first sight. I've seen him 8 times since then. To answer your point about the sort of the sort of the resistance culture, I suppose, that we have in the UK. Yes, I suppose because of it's partly probably the Irish influence. I mean, there's another great band in Ireland that I've seen only once called Stiff Little Fingers, who are a punk band, an Irish punk band. They're very, very famous for alternative Ulster and a few other things as well. I had the good fortune of meeting their bassist once because a friend of mine's one of their buddies. We're a very class-based society in the UK. In fact, in a way that is not synonymous with the US, even though you are much more divided in terms of the distance between the top tier and the bottom tiers is much further than almost every other country in the world, and all the effects that has. We've always been very vocal about the fact that we're middle class, lower middle class, working class, upper class, and royalty. In fact, it's probably the royalty that has engendered this to some degree, although I think it's probably also the way that economics played itself out. We were mostly agrarian, of course, and we've gradually changed, but we've always been very class conscious, and the fact that there was for a while the ability to be aspirational about it, to be able to move from one class to the other. Christopher Hitchens always talked about this really, really well. He was born in Portsmouth, where I lived for some considerable time, and he always said that, he essentially promised his mother, way in advance of when she actually committed suicide when he was in his 20s, that he would never go by Chris. He would always go by Christopher. And the reason for that being, as a lower middle class family with aspirations for upper middle class, Chris Hitchens is fine, but it's Chris Hitchens quite soon. It's very working class. And he said, no, it's got to be Christopher. And he would always correct people. So it's really ingrained, I mean, he ultimately became an American. So,
yeah.
But I think because of that, the working class have had to find their own voice. And our Labour Party, which was phenomenally co-opted in the 90s and with Tony Blair and even slightly before that, really, but just became an absolute business party. That undercurrent has always been a little bit. It's been closer to the microphone of the media, I suppose. And so we've had people like Billy Bragg, who have for I think almost 50 years. I mean, I don't know how long Bragg's been around for. At least the 70s, I think. They've been very vocal. They've been man on the street. They've been, William Bloke out there doing the music with the socially conscious stuff. And then, of course, I mean, how can one mention the 70s or indeed the 80s without the punk tradition? We've got God Save the Queen. But the fact that we had, I hate to use the word socialist because it's the incorrect word for it, but a sort of a class-conscious lower class with a fight for equality for at least the last 40 years in the same time as we've had royalty. It's no surprise that they sang "God Save the Queen," a fascist regime, and I think that has given birth to modern post-punk like Shikari themselves, who go one further and don't just say "fuck the Queen"; they actually say "fuck all of the preconceived systems that divide humanity," and hey, and let's celebrate the one thing which has been proven to be insightful and helpful in the resolver of actual problems, which is to go with what we know from science and the worldview that comes from applying that correctly, rather than applying it for the atomic bomb, which, as we write in our orientation guide, is actually not a failure of technology, but a failure of values, is that we would even build a bomb in the first place. So I think that's partly where it comes from, but you'll have to forgive me. Beyond that, I'm a little bit illiterate when it comes to that sort of tradition, but we certainly are very lucky that at least we still do have a very vocal area in that regard. I know that American music has been so phenomenally co-opted, and I mean, I was driving around California listening to the various radio stations. I will say K-Rock and places like that play White Zombie during the middle of the day, they get an absolute hat tip. That's great. We don't do that in the UK at all. It's such a show. When I was there, I was like, I want to move here just for K-Rock. And you got things like KPFK, which I used to listen to back in Studentville when they were doing Over the Edge and things like that. Like, there's a great amount of culture out there, but it's really hard to find because the most mega volume culture in the States seems to be, because of that conglomeration of the media, it seems to be the sort of bullshitty, sort of edutainment kind of stuff. But don't worry, we're hot on the heels of you with, our, UK Idol and all this kind of stuff. And the mass dumbing down of our music is something that has to be fought against. And that is exactly what Rao Reynolds was actually talking about when he talked about, the inherent power of music to unite, the fact that it's ubiquitous around the world. But precisely because it's so powerful, because it gets to those heartstrings, because it has medicinal effects, because it's so persuasive, and because it's implicitly communal thing, it is so open to being abused by a system that wants to sort of, skip your brain and go straight for your heart and get the propaganda in that way. And so it has to be defended against. And I think that has got to be the central moral of any musician, is that the power they wield is an emotional one, is over probably the greatest art form there is. I mean, Walter Pater, who was an English essayist, said, all art aspires to the condition of music. It's almost like it's the perfect platonic, perfect version of something that everything tries to get towards, No one dances around a fucking painting. And so with the understanding that you have that powerful art form, you have to fight against the corporate takeover of it in your own life, taking big paychecks and all the rest of it, and in terms of the message as well. And as long as that's alive and kicking, I think we'll always have a decent punk tradition in any country.
Yeah, I think I had Truth Loaders on, the journalist from Truth Loaders, who's that they do the YouTube show, and they're from the UK, and we were talking about the royal family and stuff like that, and they were saying how it was crazy how infatuated the American public was with like the royal wedding and Kate and all this stuff, and they're like, it was an American thing. Where like in the UK, it was like they were angry that they were using their taxpayers' money for this, where in the U.S. are celebrating how much money they spent on the wedding. So I think that there's probably, like you said, probably all those reasons are a part of it. The history, I think the royal family is pretty insane that there still is a king and queen, and they think that just because of a bloodline that they're smarter or more, or deserve to be more privileged or whatnot than anybody else. So I think that's pretty insane. And Enter Shikari is awesome man. I've referenced them a bunch of times on the show. If you still haven't checked them out, check them out, because they're awesome. Architects is one that I haven't referenced, I don't think, on the show once, but I've seen them live quite a few times, and they are amazing live. Another awesome band that really, with a message, which you don't see a lot of. And my theory with music, it does seem like it's like I'm always trying to figure out why do people like this dumbed down music. It's like it's just people are attracted to something that is easy to listen to. It doesn't take a lot of thinking, and I wonder how much of it maybe has to do with the fact that throughout history we're always trying to find easier ways to do things. Like we're trying to prevent extra thinking at times, or at least the majority of people. We're instead of walking, we'll ride a bike. Instead of riding a bike, we'll drive a car. We're always trying to find an easier way to do things. I wonder if because of that, we're just, I guess, wired to want music that doesn't, I guess, spark too much thought. Where it's pretty insane to think of, because I'm the complete opposite. But I like things that do spark thought. But with music, it seems like some people just like something that is easy to listen to, not anything that is too different than what they're used to or the mainstream is used to. And music in comedy is a great way of getting a message across. It's funny because I had Lee Camp on, which I'm sure you're familiar with, because I believe he was a part of I don't know if he was part of Z-Day, but he's done some stuff with the Zeitgeist Movement. And Stanhope was the one comedian that I constantly keep hearing about. I'm familiar with Stanhope's work. I'm not as big as a fan as I have a friend that's a huge Stanhope fan, like yourself. He's watched every special. He's seen him live a bunch of times, and is a huge Stanhope fan. And it's funny because that's the one name that it seems like people bring up a lot when I'm like, oh, who's our Bill Hicks of our generation? Who's our George Carlin? And Lee Camp gets. Or a lot of people will reference the Lee Camp. So I wonder who Lee Camp picks, because he can't pick himself. And he said Stanhope, and so I think that it's cool because, and I told my friend, I'm like, Stanhope, he doesn't, like, what I do remember of his specials, I'm like, I don't remember him talking about a lot of political issues or social issues, but apparently, I guess on his Facebook and on his Twitter, he's a lot more outspoken on his his opinions on stuff. So, but we need that, because I think it's a great way of getting a message across. Same way Woody Harrelson gets people to watch Ethos. I think it's good to get comedians and musicians to talk about something bigger than themselves and get people's attention, especially a young crowd. Because 1 Minute Silence was the band for me where I was growing up. Rage Against the Machine was really popular, and then 1 Minute Silence was from Ireland. I was a huge fan of theirs, and kind of exposed me to a lot of alternative views on religion, or alternative views on capitalism and money and a bunch of things. So I think it's a great way of kind of getting people to start thinking and stuff like that. So, but when it comes down to royal family, is it? I know. Well, actually, it seems like people in the UK are very, very anti-voting. I think I saw it's like they're starting to realize that the whole political thing is kind of bullshit, even though you guys do have more political parties, which is definitely better than our two parties that we basically get Coca-Cola or Pepsi to pick from, Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks. We really like we're tricked into believing we have choices when we really don't, and it's just one or the other, and usually very similar. And I know, is it correct to say that I think one of the last elections that you had a really low turnout for voting, and was that provoked by the fact that people just kind of look at the political system and they're ready to say it's bullshit and it really, it doesn't work?
We have a political system that's essentially an old boys club from the Etonians through Oxford and Cambridge. It's very unfortunate. We are very much ruled by extremely rich people. At the moment, there is a quote, conservative and Democrat sort of, they had to put themselves together because it was so close, because people are basically falling down on both sides, which I call the condemnation. And they're both old Etonians. They both belong to the Bullingdon Club, which is essentially a very rich dining club from Oxford. Forgive me if that's wrong. I'm sure it's Oxford. They would go, and Boris Johnson, our London mayor, they belong to it as well, and they would just go to really expensive restaurants, smash the shit out of them, as like guffawing Etonian idiots. And then at the end, just throw a load of money at the waiter and go, "There's your fucking money." And these people are now in charge. And are you surprised? Do you expect anything less from a system that requires your ignorance, that requires you not to do any thinking and to just click a button once every 4 years and expect it does something? It's the most amazing thing ever that this still works. And we've now very much fallen out of love with it. Occupy London was big and it went on for a while. And it's very telling that up north it was harder to deal with because for a start, it's a lot colder, and tents are really hard out there. But yeah, there is now a real disenfranchisement with the public, with the voting system. I think that it was the voter turnout was 50% or less. And it has seen the growth of really stupid parties like the UK Independence Party, who are essentially racists, if only for the fact that they choose to see the world in British and non-British terms, which it doesn't matter what they think about the color of people in that. That is itself a racist thing. May I remind you once again that the human race is one race, and to divide it into races and call it race, I even take offense to the word racism these days. You know, racism, really? Are we saying that still? That's amazing that you say that out loud. But I mean, people are, gradually throwing their protest votes towards UKIP, which is a very stupid idea. But I think that, even in that scenario, there's so few people voting now because most people are getting on with the real business of preparing themselves for the future in an actual meaningful way, trying to affect some local bonding. I mean, we had huge floods recently in Wales in Cornwall and sort of the western parts of Britain. Massive floods went on for weeks and destroyed, loads and loads of properties. And what do the politicians have to say about that? Nothing really, other than the odd soundbite and the odd confused, garbled message about dredging the rivers, which would make the water flood quicker in further inland. These are not technical people, and we are increasingly seeing more and more technical problems. Because we're an island, we have about 3 days worth of food as backup. Should the supply chain break down, we are in a World War Z situation after only a couple of days. We're in a New Orleans, bread finding situation after only 3 days. And people are very aware of that now. And people realize that these ridiculous toffs from the Oxbridge lot are absolutely the last people you should look to for any sort of political answer, and that eschewing the entire political system isn't a repudiation of human rights, because they say, oh, you fought for this right. No, you didn't. They finally granted you the right after almost a millennium of absolute servitude, and you call this a right that you won. That's bizarre. What a strange way of justifying the system.
What's your opinion on people like Russell Brand? I know he's gotten some criticism from some people in the alt media and alt news and just the alternative media saying how, who cares what he says because he's just because he's a celebrity, this and that. But the way I look at it is that if he gets a message across and he kind of gets, people more aware of the issues, I think he's going to get a lot of people who would never really have much of a political perspective or opinion to kind of maybe start focusing on some issues that are more important and kind of open some eyes. So what's your opinion on that? Do you is there a lot of talk about Russell Brand and his his very outspoken way of going around and kind of stating his opinions? And I give him props, because when you go out and you're that open with your opinions, you're going to get a lot of criticism, especially when you're just basically a stand-up comedian / actor who apparently just because you pick that as your career, you I guess people assume that you don't have a right to opinion. But the way I look at it is that he was a drug addict, and he kind of like he said that he was a part of the system, and he has a right to opinion just like anybody else. So what's your opinion on that, Ben?
Well, Russell has tried to get Peter Joseph on his show before, so he very much knows of our information. In fact, the only reason that interview didn't happen is because Brand X was actually cancelled right after one season. But he would have gone on. He was rescheduling him. The most important thing to learn about Russell Brand or anybody else who does that is actually the stuff that they don't say. I mean, I personally find it really great that this guy managed to say something on Newsnight that would stop me from shouting at the TV, because even though that program is essentially the flagship news program of BBC One, I find myself always yelling at the talking heads on there who talk around subjects without ever talking about the actual problems. That's why I was drawn to the movement, because I finally saw people going, look, these are the actual problems, and here would be the method for the technical resolution of them. And when I saw that, I was like, holy shit, finally, I can throw my weight behind that, because it's apolitical, it's technical, it's international, and you know what? It's fun to do it. But here are the most important things, and it's worth getting the thought gene from this to find out where this propaganda came from. The idea that the artists, these liberal Hollywood types who seem to always be anti-capitalist, why is that, and why should they say anything? The same accusation was leveled against uh, several of our Lady Dynamite, I think her name was Miss Dynamite, and a few other people when it was our turn to become part of the coalition of the willing in Iraq too in 2003. George Michael was an outspoken chap, and people kept ringing and going, "But you're just a musician, just a musician." Well, then, ladies and gentlemen, I am just nobody because I'm not even an artist or anybody of any note. I'm just a loudmouth who says things in public. I'm not qualified for this, so let it sink in. Nor are you. Why don't you do it too?
Yeah.
But the thing that I'll quote Ludwig von Mises here, the great Austrian economist who once was down as saying, I've got his book, The Anti-Capitalistic Mentality, somewhere. And in this, he says things which no Austrian will quote out loud because it sounds horrific, especially as a Jewish Austrian man who fled the Nazis and ran to America where he accepted a Rockefeller grant. All things that speak against what he's about to say. He says the reason why the artistic class, I think he actually refers to them as the Hollywood type, are consistently anti-capitalistic is because they know that their product is subject to a very fickle market. They may not be in tomorrow, and they would not have anything that they could rationally sell within the market that would show them up to be the charlatans that they are. They would not know how to do business, and they're very worried about this, and that's why they hate the market because of that. And then he says, the world would be better if the world was rid of all artists. Let that sink in, ladies and gentlemen. A man just essentially called for the death of all artistic endeavor because it's anti-capitalistic. Could you get a better example of the psychopathy that's at the heart of the system? And every time you hear anybody say, oh, but Russell Brand shouldn't say that because he's just an artist, or George Michael shouldn't be making anti-war statements that anybody should conflate with rational opinion because he's just a musician. What you are doing is parroting the very heart of the essentially capitalist dogma that we should leave this to experts and that an expert should have an opinion. Everybody else can have an opinion, but it can be dismissed on the basis that it's just an opinion. This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's worth remembering Henry Kissinger's assertion that the function of experts is to articulate the needs of power. I'll say it again. The function of experts is to articulate the needs of power. Okay, so the next time someone says blah, 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 because he's just disabuse yourself of this implicitly totalitarian notion.
Well, yeah. And I mean, you look at it, sometimes some of the people who are stating, hey, he's just a musician, he's just an actor, who gives a shit what they say, like, they could say the same thing. They're usually average people, and when I say average, I mean they're not celebrities or billionaires or CEOs of some big corporation. So it's like, if we use that same philosophy, then who is any of us? I mean, don't we end up basically turning into the royal family, where it's just like, well, they're the only ones who have the right to say anything. Like the rest of us,
That's
we're just
exactly right.
I mean,
it's exactly right. In fact, actually, you should try this yourself. Next time you see Walter Block go on Russia Today and say that slavery was better for black people than welfare, you just say to yourself in your head, oh, well, who gives a shit what he says? He's just an economist.
Yeah. And
try it out. It's good fun.
I feel like and you know what, I've had I'm one, like yourself, I love having conversations and I love talking to people, and I've talked to so many just normal people, either veterans or older people who are retired, and I've had some of the best conversations with some of the best, they've had some of the best perspectives and opinions on today's issues. And I mean, some of it has to do with the fact that, when you're older, you kind of don't care about materialism anymore. When you see the finish line, or when you're closer to the finish line than you are the starting line, I think you start kind of putting things in perspective a little bit. And, but these people have great opinions. My point is that a lot of average people, or some people would call average, normal, everyday people, have great opinions on things, and they're not any less important or meaningful as somebody who is, like you said, on TV talking. So it just at the end of the day, it's all people with opinions. And how much financial wealth you have, or how popular you are, it shouldn't affect how meaningful your opinion is. And I think that's one of the things that we have an issue with. Relic from Owned and Operated, the film, who was just on the last podcast or 2 podcasts ago, he talked about that the problem with we always, our opinion of somebody's perspective or what they're saying is always influenced by who's saying it. And I guess that kind of contradicts what I was saying, the fact that people don't give a shit about celebrities. But I think in some ways, if it's somebody who I guess, a royal family, then all of a sudden it's like what they say seems more meaningful. But is it, so I think that's a valid point, and I'm glad that you agree with me with the Russell Brand thing, because there's a lot of people out there who think that, he's just a comedian. It's like, well, how about we just look at his points and are they valid, and is he making sense? And the way I look at it, he was. So
Absolutely. He also exposed Jeremy Paxman's interviewing style. I mean, we've always known that Paxman has been, he's a phenomenally well-educated man, a very good interviewer, has held politicians' feet to the fire over many, many years. However, in that interview, he said, in that snarly little way, he said, "You want a revolution, don't you?" As if to belie the idea of revolution to begin with. And then, when he said, we need a revolution of the mind, of consciousness, and all that kind of stuff. And they said, "But you don't even vote. If you can't be asked to vote, why should we even listen to what you say?" And then after the interview, Paxman admitted that he hadn't voted in the last election either. In other words, we have a argumentative media that will take the opposite side, the devil's advocate, as you would say, which is actually a religious notion, by the way. It used to be when you were going to beatify someone and turn them into ultimately turn them into a saint, you would have someone fighting the devil's corner, saying why they shouldn't become a saint. But we've now seen that even amongst the so-called neutral or liberal media, it's very much adversarial, and you should take that to heart. What does that mean in terms of the logic of the media that's out there? It means that even when they agree with you, they will make it seem like they are not. And what does that do to affect people as well? Because who's going to believe who? They're going to believe Paxman, aren't they? Because surely he's well educated and all the rest of it. Even though he privately agrees with Brand about at least one point, which he admits about, he will publicly not do so. And this retards human progress. This is not a dialogue of any kind. And it's not even a decent form of devil's advocate, because you're just naysaying everything, regardless of what the point is. That would technically mean that you could say anything on that show, whether it's technically correct or not, and be gainsaid by the other side. Well, hang on. Some things are correct, or some things are known in advance,
Yeah.
And that's, so, it's very worrying, and people should immunize themselves against this sort of journalism.
Yeah, and that's it's crazy, the fact that you're going to maybe turn somebody off to what he's saying just for the sake of being the devil's advocate and really just to disagree with him. And, the way he said, "Oh, you want to start a revolution," it sounded like that was a crazy idea, and it's, "Oh, you want a revolution," and it just, he wanted to just be like people to dismiss him by saying, "See, he's a lunatic who wants to overthrow the government," and I'm like, like you said, they're not focusing on what exactly he was saying, and he was making sense. And I'll tell you, Russell Brand did a great job of restraining himself, because when you could easily tell that he was picking at him and trying to get him going and trying to make him look silly, and Russell Brand was well-spoken and got his points across and never got too upset. And so I think that was awesome. I'm glad that video went viral, and I'm glad that Russell Brand's using his celebrity to get a message across. And I agree with him. Voting is ridiculous. I think the idea of voting, I don't know who I'm quoting when I say this, but somebody said, picking the less of two evils is still picking an evil. And it's one of those things where you're basically agreeing to the system. I've never voted. I said if Ron Paul won, or if he was on the ballot, I would vote for him, and that's about it. And that's only because he would he'd be a step in the right direction, and obviously with ending the Fed, and he understands all the issues with our offensive wars instead of defensive wars, and I agree with a lot of what he says. Like, I think most people who are kind of aware and regardless what movement you're a part of, I think we can, in many issues, we can agree with each other on. And so I just think that voting would be silly. It'd be me saying that, and I think that's what they do. Like, so we all agree right now in America that Obama has done a crappy job. Both sides, nobody can disagree that even the people who were all on board basically, there's just too much evidence to prove that he hasn't done anything. He hasn't done anything that he's promised. He's trying to start wars with Russia. He's trying to start wars, trying to justify chemical weapons or going into Syria and using the chemical weapons things to justify it. And he's doing all these things that are very, not what they thought they voted for. So I think we gotten to the point where people are upset. But what ends up happening every election year is that eventually the politics convince us that the new guy that's going to go in power is going to change things. It's going to be different. And it's like we get brainwashed that one year where just like they've done a great job of making us feel like our vote means something and we're actually voting for change. And it's funny because I was just finishing watching the Oliver Stone series, The Untold History of America, and
Fantastic.
yeah, it's really good. And it's funny because if you look at all these like Truman and or whatever, all these old politicians, and you look at like when they're campaigning, all their slogans, they all say similar things, like the idea of vote for me, it's a vote for change, or whatever. But they're all about the selling the idea that voting for me is going to be different than this crappy current policy. So it seems like, holy shit, what ends up happening? We're in this cycle of voting for somebody, they get in power, realizing that it was bullshit, and it didn't, they obviously didn't do anything that they promised or represent us in any way, and then the same thing happens, and election year comes, and we're convinced that this person is going to be the change, and then it's this vicious cycle that we get stuck in, and we, and I don't know, it drives me insane because do you agree with that? Do you think that they when you look at history, it just seems like they've done a good job of just convincing us we have this choice and then there's no change, but do you think we're going to get to the point where eventually people are going to stop falling for this trick?
Yeah, but it's not going to be in a sort of sudden way where, 1 year no one votes, although that would be fucking brilliant if that happened. Just as a message, just like, you know what, your stupid little spiel where you spend $1 billion that could feed the homeless in the country that you're pretending to run is spent on media appearances.
Why can't we vote on issues? Why can't we vote on issues? We don't vote on issues. We vote on somebody that we hope when they get in power still remembers what they ran on and care. So I'm voting for somebody that I'm crossing my fingers when they get in power, they actually like represent me and the views that supposedly they said that they're running on or whatnot. So it's this idea that like we don't actually get to vote on issues. We get to vote on a person that we have to cross our fingers and hope that they make the right choice. That's fucking insane. We don't get to vote on wars. We don't get to vote on taxes. We don't get to vote on any of this crap. I mean, very few things we get to vote on, and we just get to vote on somebody that we have to, like I said, cross our fingers and hope that they represent us. I mean, that seems insane.
No, surely it doesn't seem insane to you. What else would you expect? I come back to that point again. In a system that thrives on control and thrives on, a real control. I mean, you know about Edward Bernays. You've seen all the Adam Curtis documentaries. This is exactly what we'd expect. How dare you suggest that you should be allowed to vote on anything meaningful? What are you, some kind of communist? The thing is that even if we did vote on issues, ultimately the resolution of any of these issues are going to be technical in nature. And so that's where the Zeitgeist Movement tries to come in and say, listen, what are we going to do about the homeless? What are we going to do about prisons? Ultimately, the actual resolution of them are going to be social, are going to be technical, are going to be requiring of some technical knowledge and expertise and of the understanding of the way that human beings are affected by their environment. I'll give you an example that I think really underscores this. A couple of years ago, I used to follow a blog. I won't give its name because it's pretty valueless now. That would always it would play to the sort of the left. It was a left chap, I think, from, again, California. I think he was from like San Francisco or something. And he would always call Obama the worst president ever. And it was always, it seemed all right. I mean, it was very much partisan, black versus white on all issues, basically, gun control versus no gun control. He was gay himself. So it was, don't ask, don't tell was a big deal, which, of course, had been Clinton and then was finally repealed by Obama. Or rather, it was repealed by the value system during the time when Obama was president. And I say that because it's not Obama that did anything. That's just a very much a front person for a business organization that manages to convince you that the stuff that happens is under the volition of one human being who is easily identifiable and fits conveniently on a bumper sticker. But I mean, this guy essentially, at the moment that Obama publicly said, 50 years too late, gays are people too, basically, and that, their rights should be there and we should have gay marriage. He completely drops all of the well thought out problems that he had with Obama, where he called him the worst president ever and said, yeah, I'm voting for this guy now, basically on one single issue. Now, why is that? Well, it's because There's been a very calculated move by the political party that calls itself Obama to pander to a particular section of the population who are very emotionally invested for good reasons in a particular issue. And that's all that carries weight from then on. He can create as many wars as he likes. He can not shut down the concentration camp of Guantanamo Bay, which you have in your country. Don't worry, we invented the concentration camp, so I'm not pointing fingers in the UK. He can do all these astonishing, egregious things. He can ignore the climate change recommendations from Oslo, which is basically the detriment of almost all of humanity. He can carry on all the pollution for profit. He can bail out Wall Street, all he likes, to the vast detriment. Way down the line, probably 20 years down the line, you're going to start seeing stress-related cancers really kick in your country and mine. And all that will be forgotten because one time he was nice to gay people for a bit. And this is why even I would say issue voting is utter bullshit. And we need to take an actual stock and account of the human situation on the planet, of the massive stressors that are prone to really producing disease and crime and all that stuff. You solve that, you actually solve all the issues, or at least you address them for the first time correctly. Yeah. We're just as bad in the UK, by the way. It's stock standard to say that the US has a bad time of this. It's only because your media is eminently exportable that we know about this stuff. The UK does exactly the same thing, where we have a show called Question Time, where it goes around the country, and its intents are quite good. David Dimbleby, who is the son of another eminent broadcaster, Richard Dimbleby, so both sirs, actually, both Knights of the Realm. There's another bullshit thing that we have that you guys don't. He goes around with various people. Both Hitchens brothers have been on it before. Quite a few politicians. David Cameron's been on it. And they go around and they basically bring audience members from wherever they happen to be, Coventry, Crawley, Leeds, whatever. And they then ask them questions. And guess what? All the questions are completely irrelevant because they come from an uninformed public who have learned to simply parrot certain things which should apparently be local issues, which never are. They're always about just bizarre, semi-political, invented things. And so you end up having a really false debate because we're relying on the, quote, free speech of a, quote, educated public. And we have neither. We have neither free speech nor do we have education. I have comedically said on more than one occasion in public that the Zeitgeist Movement should actually infiltrate deliberately one of these programs where we find out where the next one's going to be, which is absolutely visible on the BBC website. And then as many people as possible go and sign in and basically get their questions ready. And then we all switch them for the questions that we want to ask and watch the politicians fail over and over again to be able to answer. Hey, what happens? I'll give you an example. 2 days ago, Clegg, who is the he's the minor key of our prime minister. There's a major key and a minor key, David Cameron and Clegg. He says, the goal of our government is full employment. May I humbly suggest that is the stupidest thing that could have been said in this age of automation, where surely we are for the first time looking at a real freeing from pointless labor, from using the amazing human brain for such ridiculous tasks as even things like brain surgery, even things that are really, really complex. I find it amazing that we let human beings with their fallible behaviors near a human brain. And all this kind of stuff. They're absolutely demanding the opposite of what is required for us to be ready in the future. Automation can actually relieve us of a phenomenal amount of dangerous, boring, and deadly work, so that we can go about actually doing, as you said before, really inventing the stuff, really innovating, really connecting with each other again. And there you have somebody demanding, we want to have full employment. And guess what? Because people are strapped, because people are really poor, and because people do still need money in the system, they think that what he's saying equates to their freedom. Whereas, in fact, it is the worst thing you could do in preparing for the future. But it gets translated into this issue of employment. And this is something that people are going to have to learn for themselves. And you know what? We kind of are going to, because automation is going to happen anyway. You don't vote for that. It's preferred by the market because it's cheaper. If you don't have health care to pay for someone, no accidental insurance, no holidays, no sick days, no boredom, no differential behaviors, things like concentration levels. All this stuff is innate to the human being and is a problem for business. And it's great that you can just automate it, and people are going to keep doing it until one day when a politician somewhere says, I want more jobs for people. they'll finally hear what they're actually saying, which is we have no fucking idea how to handle an economy that demands consumption, which requires your earning money, which requires you to be employed in some sense. And by the way, sorry, we don't have a welfare state to plug that gap because that's all gone as well. And we have no idea how to reconcile that very capitalistic, or at least monetary-based notion with the coming abundance that can be afforded to human beings everywhere and its environmental possibilities through automation and the correct use of intelligent technologies. We have no idea what to do. So we're going to keep saying stuff that makes you think that you need it.
Aren't we fucked anyways? Because the way I look at it is that how do you have capitalism and continue automation in the same society? Because it doesn't seem like they go hand in hand. Capitalism will continue to get machines to replace jobs, but you can only have companies growing and making money if people have jobs to work and make money to buy things. So it's like, aren't they going to collide?
That's right. This is what Karl Marx called the contradiction of capitalism, and not that I want to quote Karl Marx, although he was certainly right about that. The great thing, and I would recommend again Rifkin's book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, where he says really that the product after capital goods, which are things like factories and production, all that stuff, after that's been factored in, it's the Amazon.com that produces our book for free, right? The zero marginal cost is what comes on top. In other words, the cost of producing extra units of anything are essentially so low as to be nothing. He paints a very decent picture of how actually the wonderful thing is that the push towards this kind of society where more and more, not just information, but physical objects, like home 3D printers are gonna just get cheaper, partly because the capitalist system in a way forces prices down, but in ways that are phenomenally detrimental to the environment. In technological terms, technology itself pushes prices down way quicker than capitalism as well. You only have to look up Moore's law to understand that. The general cheapening of electronics is not really an engine of the economic system. It's a technical thing. And then finally, also, the creation of these decentralized systems, these systems that don't operate the way traditional capitalism did, are actually a product of the capitalist system. That's what Rifkin argues, at least, is that we're actually being pushed into the new paradigm by the old one. And that actually one of the greatest ironic allies in the coming open society is going to be the dying vestiges of capitalism. And as more and more people can rely on the commons again, on essentially free architecture. There are even people who there's a company now that produces open source architecture, so you can actually print your own house, and it shows you how to put it together in what order, and you can describe how big the plot of land is that you have, the sort of the aspects of the environment, and it tells you how to print the house, in what shape. That 3D printed goods, so you're not buying stupid toys for your kids that were imported from China at phenomenal diesel cost. I mean, those chugging diesel engines that bring all that shit from China, that's like running 50 million cars. But guess what? When you have a 3D printer sat at home or in your locality somewhere, it doesn't use that anymore. You circumvent the requirement for it. And one of the final nails in the coffin of the capitalist system is that they do respond to lowering interest, lowering demand. That's one thing you could say for the system, is that as people stop buying the imported garbage that hopefully will sell and the rest will just throw in garbage, they start to print on demand toys for children, and guess what? Toys that actually educate rather than just stupid Barbie doll, marketing stuff. I have a daughter, and I've yet to buy her anything like that. And by the way, I give her a musical education through Spotify and Deezer, so she knows way more music than I did when I was a kid. That's another example of the open source society. Look at, I've got 70 million tracks that I didn't buy that I can expose her to, so that she has a real musical education. Instead of buying all these programming toys, you can start creating your own better ones. And the demand goes down immediately. People stop buying from each other. Now, the next problem is it is claimed by people like Steven Pinker that one of the reasons that we live in a, quote, low violence society now is that we've started selling stuff to each other. And the damage of not selling to it, basically, the cost of war is now too high compared to the cost of just trading with each other. Now, if that's true, that should be something to actually be worried about, because we're about to stop trading quite so much with each other internationally. And that's a good thing because of the huge effects that has on just resource waste and just moving things around according to price. I mean, you'll know this. I think you even mentioned this on your podcast. A T-shirt, the cotton comes from America, but it gets exported worldwide to be printed into a T-shirt, like to be, sewn together in sweatshop labor, and then re-imported into the States to be sold at phenomenal profit.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
But that's exactly what you get when you essentially when you run things through money, when you run things through where the focus is the quote medium of exchange, in other words, the form of property that is money, rather than actually resource efficiency, rather than locality production. And that's why we talk about a decentralized but planned economy, where you talk about having the world being coordinated, but not run through one giant supercomputer. It's just That's exactly how you wouldn't do it. That's how it doesn't work. That's how the traffic system doesn't work. That's how the internet doesn't work. All the good systems that work well now precisely work because they are not centralized. And so if we want to solve any of that stuff, we have to do it that way. But we do have to prepare ourselves for the coming drop in international demand and what that means for those localities, because then we need to have people in China able to 3D print their own needs and have local open gardens for food and have a decentralized internet that can't be shut off by their terrifying government. Otherwise, the drop in demand from export of now redundant manufactured goods is going to cause something like a war. And we do need to be ready to have real independence rather than this kind of sovereign state nonsense that we talk about. There's no such thing as a sovereign state. You are a member of Earth, and that's the first thing that's true. But we do need to be prepared for the increasing enmeshment of global citizens, but the disenmeshment of the member states and how they sort of haven't warred with each other because of trade. Well, trade's about to go away, although it won't go away overnight. Again, this is, I think, a slow development. So are we fucked? Well, I think that the environmental stuff is much more serious. And I think you are right that we now have to basically mitigate. And again, by the way, that's another example of why we need to have systems that really are ready for the kind of battering we're about to get. Look at what didn't go down during Hurricane Sandy. It was the internet. It did not go down because it's nodal, because knocking down one bit doesn't cut linearly down everything after it, because it just automatically load balances through the remaining nodes. That's what's so great about it. That's what we need with everything else as well.
I haven't heard you guys talk too much about this, but I'm kind of curious on what your opinion is. I feel like the decriminalizing of drugs and our marijuana and psychedelics, and eventually I think it's kind of where we're going, at least with marijuana. I think that it's gonna help with the fight against, I guess, the status quo and kind of what we've been, what we considered is the world that is justified as is. I feel like actually the theme song for this podcast, I think I use it at the end of the song. It's Dennis McKenna, which is
Terrence's brother.
Yeah, Terrence's brother. I use a snippet of him talking about psychedelics and talking about how the reason why they're suppressing it is to basically to keep us in the producer consumer agenda and keep us not, these dumb us down and not get us to break the mold and think about things and really put things in perspective and think about why are we doing this or why, are we being tricked into this? And it reminds me of like the Vietnam stories and just how like everybody talked about the hippies and this and that, but yet the hippies were, they were all fucked up on drugs and they're all about love and peace and whatnot. But it seemed like because of they were, maybe it was because of the acid trips and the smoking weed and whatnot that made them kind of look at basically what we're being sold and saying, wait, this is bullshit. Like, war is insane. Like, why are we fighting these people? For what reason? Like, just because they look different than us or because of this? And this seems pretty crazy. And I wonder if eventually as marijuana and hopefully other psychedelics end up being decriminalized, if that's going to maybe provoke outside of the box thinking. Do you think there's anything to that?
Well, I would say that the drug problem and the drug war, as the Americas have waged them, is, of course, complete bullshit. And it's not going to be a solution to criminalize what is essentially a medicinal problem. It's an illness to be a drug addict. I know we're not talking about addictive drugs now. Well, I'll give you a couple of different perspectives. I mean, our perspective generally is that once you have a society, or if you try and describe a society and work towards a society that is actually based on, how what human what human needs are, then I think you'll find that people will stop self-medicating so very much. I don't agree with the idea that Vietnam was ended because of the hippies.
Well,
In
not
fact, I'll give
ended,
you a,
but
I'll give you, or at least the idea that
the
that it was somehow an emancipation.
well,
Um,
well, what I meant by I don't know how I worded it, but my point was that I felt like the protests were influenced by people who it seemed like a lot of the people who were doing the protests were people who were using psychedelics and smoking weed and whatnot, and I wonder if that had a direct influence on them not being sold the propaganda.
yeah, certainly the psychedelic experience, of which I am a partial attempter. I haven't done Terence's 5 dried grams, that although he stopped doing that before he said that. Um, but I've done some hallucinogens. It's a very interesting experience to do, of course. I'll give you the other side of the coin, though, and I'm not sure where I fall on this. There is a gentleman called Jan Irvin. He's not actually a fan of what we do. He thinks that essentially the Zeitgeist Movement is advocating the New World Order, but that's okay though, because that kind of opinion is assuming the top-down centralized hierarchy stuff. Whereas we're trying to get the critical thinking emancipation going, which he is as well, but also a technical emancipation going, where there is no way of centrally controlling this kind of stuff anymore, but just living in line, very much like a tree isn't a centrally controlled organism. It's actually a set of subsystems. But he wrote an article with another gentleman called "Manufacturing the Deadhead: A Product of Social Conditioning," and they put forward, with I think some degree of merit, the idea that the counterculture of the 1970s and the late 60s, everything from the Grateful Dead, Laurel Canyon, all that, was essentially or ended up being a useful project of the CIA. And there was nothing more convenient than having Woodstock with unthinking people, I think as they described it, fornicating in the dirt. I think is the phrase they use. And also when you look at, I mean, you've mentioned the Gulf of Tonkin incident before. The guitarist from the Police, his father was on that boat, was part of the management of that boat that started it all. And his 3 sons go on to create the Police, FBI talent agency, and IRS recordings, which are all, of course, amusingly named for their powerful counterparts. The Doors come out of nowhere. The Byrds have never played a single note as a band before they're signed immediately. The general idea is that there's a huge amount of cultural manufacturing going on, and that actually one of the most useful ways of promoting a dumbed down, disinterested, peace and love man kind of organization that can be actually phenomenally easy controlled through their, what is it, turn on, tune in, drop out, as Timothy Leary said. One of the most useful things is to make them essentially interested more in drugs than in actual issues. Now, that's their opinion. I think it's a little bit harsh, but I mean, they present some very interesting evidence for it. And there was a book by a guy called Dave McGowan that actually goes very deeply into the connections between people who were cultural creators of the time and their Secret Service fathers, mothers, and brothers, and whatever. I'll leave it up to you to make up your own opinion. I don't really have a strong opinion either way. It's just I do think that ultimately, even though the psychedelic experience and sort of doing drugs it kind of can teach you some stuff, the most important and really the only lesson it can teach you is that your own 5 senses, we have more than 5 senses, and your own perceptions are very much open to question. And now, what does that mean when people then appeal to what is sensible, what is right, what is obvious? We all know what's right in our hearts. You hear some people bleating. Well, do we? And if so, how do we know that? I've seen my reflection in the window randomly turning into different people as I'm watching it and ending up, and I've been even watched my friend talk to me, and I've seen his face turn into different people and then ultimately turn into mine. There are things that are, you can make your brain do all kinds of stuff, but ultimately I think that if you had, a society where there really was an egalitarian undercurrent, where you really did know that the priority of your society is in actual enrichment and the constant updating with new knowledge to benefit everybody, and that it's really an open source thing. There are no more secrets. And look, how much stuff is there on the planet? We don't know, because it's party to large corporations thriving off you not knowing that. Once that's the other way around, and once you start to see real enrichment and real longevity and health in society, I think the kind of drug taking you will see will be as rare and as weirdly looked at as snus is now, or snorting tobacco, or this kind of stuff, which is still there. And it's not something that's, there's no one petitioning against it. We know the dangers of it, but it's just so marginal that it just seems a bit odd to most people. So I think there's a limited perspective from my side on that, probably.
Well, it seems like people like Graham Hancock and Dennis McKenna and a lot of people who have done, ayahuasca, DMT, and things like this. It seems like the benefit is that it kind of gets you to look at things outside the box, and a different perspective. It makes you question everything from who you are to why you believe things. And I guess you can argue that studying philosophy can do similar things, but it's one of those things where it seems like it kind of makes sense, because it's maybe there isn't a link between the smoking weed and the hippies being anti-war or whatnot, but it seems like in today's age, a lot of people who have done psychedelics and stuff like that, and I'll admit I've never done them, but I've read a lot about it, I've listened to a lot of conversation about it, and it seems like there is something about seeing things outside the box, and I feel like that's beneficial in maybe getting people to even, I guess, not question the Zeitgeist Movement as much, or even make them really wonder why they think it's so unreachable, the idea of having a resource-based economy. Because you look at it, a lot of people that, like I said earlier in the show, we're conditioned to believe that this government, the way our system works today is the only system that would work, and anything outside of this seems insane. But I just feel like, if you, and from just, again, like I've never done it, so just from hearing other people's accounts of it, it seems like if you do psychedelics and you do DMT or ayahuasca, or if you smoke weed, or you do what a simulation tank, or not simulate, whatever type of tank Joe Rogan has, things like that kind of expand your consciousness. It seems like it could be beneficial to at least make you wonder if this system, which some people are just stuck in believing that this is the only system that will work and we just have to modify it, and anything that seems different, like a resource-based economy, is insane. And so I felt like just thinking about that, it seemed like it would be beneficial to the movement. Don't you think? I mean, or at least, and really, like, I know we talk, but really we're made up of, like you said, we're made up of chemicals. We're everything affects our thinking, caffeine and what we eat and how much sleep we have and stuff like that. So it's one more thing that, because you talk to people and people are like, well, I don't, I'm not for people, taking something that's going to affect my way of thinking. And I guess I can understand that point of view too. The idea that some people believe, well, it's not a real experience. You're putting a chemical in your body, but everything we put in our body affects, how we feel and how we perceive things, doesn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, I can give you an example from today. There was a very, very large crime drop in the early 90s. And it's always been subject to debate where it came from. There was one now, I think, fairly well debunked theory that it was the introduction of Roe versus Wade that allowed, violent crime to drop like 20 years later, when it was theorized, I think, by some very bizarre people, that an increase in abortion of black babies that would have been in deprived environments were then not around to commit crimes in the 90s. Now, that statistically doesn't add up. But I mean, one thing that came out today, it was in Chemical and Engineering News, which is an ACS publication, American Chemical Society. The theory is now that a ban on lead, so lead-free fuel and lead-free paints, led to the drop in violence. So when people say, I don't want to put stuff in my body, you are already putting stuff in your body, and that is actually being put in by the social operation. By the way, the man who invented the lead additive that goes in fuel also invented chlorofluorocarbons, which are contributing to the ozone layer depletion and will do for the next many, many years, because it's extremely hungry for ozone. It was one guy who will affect your skin and probably has affected levels of violence, right? Through just the 1-2 horrifying inventions that he created within a few years of each other. So yeah, I think you are right. I think any input that can get you to critically think about the current system, or really entertain without the blinders on what it means to live successfully on this planet as a species rather than just as an individual, get a lot of money, get a white picket fence, and then die, versus, hey man, how about thriving as a race, and thriving as an entity on the planet, and in doing so mitigate all the symptoms of not living successfully on the planet, which are increased violence, whether it's due to lead or not, or social non-cohesion, or even worse, punitive measures that actually fuck people up way worse. So when they come out of prison, they are de facto not able to live in a society with other people. And so yeah, again, we come back to that overall approach, and I think that overall approach, even if you may start entertaining it through psychedelics, is ultimately going to be one that requires us to become a lot more scientifically literate than we are at the moment. And I include myself in that, by the way. I have a long way to go. The most important thing you'll learn if you ever interface with our materials is just how little we and you know, and how much we need to. And I think it was actually Lawrence Krauss who recently said at an atheist convention that we should probably redefine the word literate to include scientific literacy, which means that I am illiterate as a human being until I sort this out. I cannot call myself literate yet. And so that should be something that we should take away and seek to put in and really enrich our lives that way. It's been the one enduring thing, even if all my efforts are wasted, and in a few years, every effect of mine and others is utterly forgotten, and we go some very different way. At least it would have been fucking worth it, because it was fun trying, and I learned a lot in the process. And what could be nicer than that?
Yeah, and I think that's what we should try to achieve in life. I think that unfortunately we take away the opportunity for people to achieve things like that, because unfortunately, like Peter Joseph talks about and like you've talked about, the idea that we make people get in debt early in life. We're stuck in this debt. We're a slave to these corporations, and we don't get to really do anything that's fulfilling. And I think that's what we should strive for. I think that's what's important in life. I think, Graham Hancock said it once. He's like, the problem with today's society is that we judge people based on what type of car they drive and not how many rides they give them with that car. And it was a very simple way of just stating the fact that, there's society. I mean, it's so important. And I can't stress this enough. It's so important to whatever makes you happy, whatever gives you fulfillment, do it, chase it. Don't let anything get in the way, and just do it. And don't worry if like you said, Ben, like if you don't succeed, or if you look back and you say, hey, maybe all the work I put in was for nothing because it was long and forgotten and whatnot, then it was still worth it because of the fact that, one, you enjoyed it, and two, I think you can look back at your life and be way happier looking back and say you attempted to do something than not. I mean, this podcast is a perfect example. This podcast, my music project, we have a family-owned construction company. I could easily say, fuck all this stuff that is just a bad investment because I just spend money doing it and on software and putting it out and whatnot, and I'm getting nothing in return, financially. And I just focus on working construction and saving money and making some more money and whatnot. But that stuff doesn't make me happy. I hate the corporate world, because it's funny, because I talk so much about capitalism and corporations, this and that, and I'm a part of one, actually. We have a family-owned corporation, a small construction company. So it's just like a lot of times I wonder, I'm like, people are probably thinking, oh, this he doesn't know anything about the business world. He doesn't know. I'm like, I'm actually in it. I'm a part of it. And I absolutely hate it. I think that people are just out for themselves. You create these money addicted monsters who only care about more profit and will cut corners anywhere to do so. And the idea that people actually care about the product, or, I mean, to some extent they do. I think when you're a smaller company, or a family, you still find these mom and pop little places where people do care about the product they're putting out, the food, quality food, old recipes, and they find pride in that. But I think, when you get to public companies, they only care about stockholders, and it's basically against the law not to attempt to make quarterly gains, and so that's all people care about, and that's such a shitty way of living your life. You're gonna look back and you're gonna say, okay, I made a bunch of money, and now what? That's why, what was it, the Rockefellers or the Carnegie or what? Some of the big popular or powerful families from the industrial ages that at the end of their lives they were giving all this money out to for free, just giving it out to organizations and fundraisers and all this stuff, probably because they felt guilty about the shitty. Well, there's probably more to the story than that, but
Yes, there is. Actually, I'll give you the book that you need to read on that, by the way, because that's very much not what they were doing.
Really?
And this goes, by the way, this goes for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as well. That is fraudulent what they're doing. It is nothing to do with realizing finally what is up with the world and undoing your bad deeds. The book you should read on this is Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I've
must have come across this.
I've come across it many a time. I've never read it, but I know Tragedy and Hope, the website. I know Richard.
That's
Grove.
a great website too. I really enjoy what those guys do as well.
Yeah.
And actually, that'll lead me on in a minute to the point about why there are so many different organizations seeking the same goals. But Tragedy and Hope is a vast, sprawling work by a former Georgetown professor. He's now dead, unfortunately. He specialized in the Anglo-American Empire, which is essentially the thing that is crumbling now, and brought us most of modern capitalism. And this goes back to people like Cecil Rhodes, who, by the way, is why Zimbabwe used to be called Rhodesia. It was Rhodes, who actually named the whole country after himself. Gives you an idea of what kind of person he was. The Rhodes Scholarship comes from him as well. And if you pay attention to what they're funding, they're very much funding the survival of this system. They're funding people who become very good at particular types of things. The De Beers Diamond Corporation is another reason. There's some great stuff on there. Read that book and then try and say that sentence again. I think you'll find that you fall very much on the other side, which is that money perpetuates the demand for more money, always. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is exactly the fucking same. Those guys, they talk about environmental, helping the environment and stuff, and then they invest all their money in Exxon and BP and all the rest of it, ostensibly under green projects. But we know that that's not true.
Well, I agree with you.
There's a great Mother Jones article that came out that traces all of their bullshit funds and all the lies they tell. And it's unfortunate because I don't get angry at individual people or individual institutions because it is a larger systems issue. But the idea of this Warren Buffett style massive corporate aren't they wonderful thing is exactly the opposite of what it advertises itself as.
Oh yeah, and I agree with you. I was making the point more of the fact that I think that there are people at the end of their lives, and I hang out with a lot of older people, retired people, and I just love, not because they need my help to walk or anything. I hang out with them because they're cool, and they're either we met through mutual friends or whatnot, and I just enjoy being around them because there's something about once you get to, like I said, you can see the finish line. I feel like materialism just can't, to a lot of people, it seems like materialism just isn't important and you can't sell that bullshit anymore. And you start looking at your legacy and you start looking at, and I was using them to make that example. It was a bad example because like you said, and like I said out loud, there's probably a lot more to the story, but I was just using that for the example of the fact that I think that when people get to the end of their lives, when they look back at it, they're not going to care about how much money they made. They're not going to care about, they're going to care about the legacy.
Absolutely.
They're going to care about, did I positively influence my kids, my grandkids, my friends? What do people remember? I mean, last year I went to two funerals to two people in the construction industry, and one was a rich guy who was an asshole, and nobody, the funeral people just went there because they knew him, and nobody spoke highly of him, and he was just this cheap asshole who just, didn't do shit for anybody and just cared about profit. And most of us were there, including myself, because we kind of, we felt like because we knew him, we should have been there. And then there's another funeral I went to, this guy who was the nicest guy you ever meet, friendly to everybody, and just super nice. He worked for he's from my hometown, and we worked a lot together because he works for a company that we work with sometimes, and he knows my parents and my family or whatever. But to make a long story short, just awesome guy. And at the funeral, everybody was just telling stories about, having fun with him, doing this and doing that, and just laughing with him about this, and how he would go out of his way for anybody and this and that. And it was just like, it makes you wonder. And unfortunately, I guess the bad thing about funerals is somebody dies. But the good thing about funerals, if there is a good thing, is is the fact that you get to really it forces you to put things in perspective, and it forces you or at least forces the idea that tomorrow's not promised, and and what's really important, and then you realize that all these material things and all the these things that we think are important, at the end of the day, when we die and and it's over with, what do we leave behind? And I think that memory of being a good person and trying to spread good ideas and opinions, and I think that's so important. So I that
Absolutely. I think that we can put this in several different ways. You could say that that flag that they're going to lay over your casket is going to be made of the social fabric that you looked after. And if you didn't, if you were not an ally to the rest of humanity, and if you just let your voice die out that way, then there's not going to be anybody at your funeral. You will not be remembered. Not that that matters. I fully expect not to be remembered myself at all, really, in the future. But here's an exercise that you can do. I'm going to do this in the next couple of weeks, and maybe your listeners can try this as well, because we maybe want to feel what it feels like to essentially be old and have that reverse perspective where most of your life is behind you rather than in front of you. It's more and more subtracted from less and less remaining. And that is to try and write your own obituary. Write it tomorrow. Wake up wake up in about an hour early. It's going to take a while, and write down from a third person perspective what you really achieved in life and what you think the lasting effects of your life would have been if they were reported in the mainstream media. And what you are left with, unless you're essentially a very arrogant person or somebody who has lived an astonishing life already and you've reported it honestly, is going to be disappointing. And if it's disappointing, that should be the spur to go and make you do amazing things. Write your own obituary. Let those words that are normally said after your death be said beforehand, and see what you're left with.
that's actually a really good exercise. That seems like it would work. It definitely would make you put things in perspective, and I guess that means you wouldn't have to wait till the next funeral. You could just do that.
Do you know what? The last funeral I went to was for my grandmother. She died at 94. It was like 2 years ago. She was my father's mother, and she was a hard ass, man. I mean, her father died in an industrial accident when she was like 12, and she raised like 5 kids by herself, her own brothers and sisters. Not surprisingly, she only had one son, my father, and she was tough as old boots. She was a bit crazy, and she lived the last 15 years of her life in abject insanity, very, very much alone. You realize the more and more mad people get, the less and less they can really understand what's happening around them, and the worse and worse it affects them. This happens even with very rich people like Norman Wisdom, who was a great comedy actor from Britain. He died essentially the same way. It's just the debilitating parts of the brain. It's your life finally taking its toll on the hardware, and I remember at my grandmother's funeral, my father read the eulogy, and even though they lived through real tough times, I mean, he lived in post-war Birmingham. Birmingham is halfway up Britain. It's just a horrendous place. I would compare it probably to Fresno, except even worse. Imagine if Fresno had been bombed during the war and then had been rebuilt poorly because only working class people lived there, apparently. That's really what Birmingham was like. It's much better these days. And he was growing up amongst the rubble, and they would go to the West Country for their holidays once a year. And my father relayed this during the eulogy. He said, and when I came back to Birmingham, I couldn't understand why I couldn't stop crying. And it was because it was the effect of, having that wonderful holiday and then coming back to this awful, just, metropolis filled with nothing but sorrow and despair and destruction, and very unhappy, very unhealthy people who had been through rationing and through, their teeth were falling out. They had no meaningful source of calcium or anything. And then one day they managed to upgird themselves and move as the essentially working class people they were, and completely moved to the West Country. And he grew up then, his formative years right before the Royal College of Music, 'cause he's a musician, were actually then in the place that he's considered heaven. And I thought to myself, what must that have been like? How hard must that have been for a father and mother who literally have nothing, that have been through arguably the worst systematic destruction of life that we've seen on the planet. At least, well, no, I'd say in Western civilization, in Europe. I mean, there are stories from the East that are way worse, or at least worse in their overall scope of human death. And managed to somehow make it work. Had scraped every penny together like I don't have to these days. I don't have the kind of poverty in my life, and I think most people don't that did back then. What kind of a person does that take? And that thought has stayed with me and lives on in my reflections about modern life and how best to once celebrate, but also mitigate that, so we don't have to have people go through that anymore. It is your final legacy. Is the final word spoken about you is the best word spoken about you. Make sure it's a good one.
Yeah, yeah. No, I definitely agree. And that exercise is definitely something I'm going to end up sharing with some of my friends, because I think that's a really interesting way of getting people to put things in perspective. And it's so weird because you see these people who these old school. My parents were raised in Portugal on a farm, and it was funny because you mentioned earlier in the show that the idea of stress and whatnot. And I think I've told this a similar story on the podcast before. The idea that my father would talk about how happy he was in Portugal, working on the farm from sun up to sundown. And I'd always look at him like, "Are you fucking crazy? That sounds awful." I'm like, "At least I get to work 40 hours and I get to go home or whatnot, and I don't have to work all day." And he's like, "No, you don't get it. You don't get it." And it was funny because I didn't get it when I was younger, and then as I got older, I started understanding. And then I heard Shane Smith from Vice.com talk about blue zones, and he was talking about the idea of these places on Earth that people have the highest average life expectancy, and how they're very a lot of them are farmers. They're probably physically more labor intensive, but they don't have the stresses. And then I started thinking about my father's story, and I'm like, holy shit! I'm like, I get it now. Like, it's the idea that he had to work from sun up to sundown, but he went at his own pace. He didn't have a boss screaming at him about deadlines. He's outside, so he's one with nature. He's one with the animals and stuff like that. At lunchtime, you got to hang out with friends and laugh and have a drink or whatnot, and then kind of so it was like this stress-free type of lifestyle. Well, even though it was physically more labor intensive, and that's kind of what we always kind of look at. What's a better job? A job where you're getting your hands dirty and it's labor intensive, or a job where you get to wear a suit and make decisions or whatnot. So I felt like I got it, because it's like people in Portugal and like these farms, like they probably are happier because they get to, they don't have to worry about a cell phone bill every day. They don't have to worry about, every month. They don't have to worry about, paying, just credit card bills and just getting anxiety every time you go get the mail because you owe money to God knows who and whatever. So it was a simpler life. But yet it was also less stress, and it was just like to think about a world that we don't need these things seems insane, but it's a perfect example of how we've been sold materialism. My dad was one of 12, and you could never afford 12 kids in America, in 2014, not without tons of support, social support, from the government. It's because back then, because they didn't have they didn't have TVs, they didn't have a lot of the things that's kind of the marketing that to sell your kids that they need this or want this or whatever. They were happy with just working on the farm and being around their friends and hanging out and being social creatures like naturally we are, and so it just it kind of makes you put things in perspective, like how this complicated life that we live in, how has it made things better or has it made things worse, and one of the reasons why maybe these people who live in these blue zones live so long.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, one of the things about stress that people need to realize is it's cumulative as well. So it can be that the constant advertising and marketing for, as you put it, and as Fight Club puts it, the shit you don't need, gets you necessarily down. It has to depress you in order for you to medicate yourself with that product. That eventually will make you like desperately unhappy. The ennui, the alienation that you fear, becomes something that's really psychosocial and leads to real behavioral and psychotic problems, which are then medicated short term with the pseudoscientific SSRI antidepressants. And then what you end up with, and almost to dovetail back to the gun issue, you end up with 90%, more than 90% of school shootings committed by people on these mind-altering drugs. And so you see that psychosocial stress pervades everything. It was actually called by a Harvard professor, he called it a social pollutant, inequality, because it affects everything, very much like a physical pollutant in the air would affect everything as well. So it's not just getting people to use less stuff. By the way, the Zeitgeist worldview ultimately talks about once you've actually met people's needs in an efficient way, there's actually more to go around for once. You can actually, for once, really have quite a lot of stuff in a sustainable way. Whereas this sort of throwaway bullshit we have now, that's not really a proper want anyway. All that stuff, wants are generated by culture anyway. So we're not talking, no one needs to be imagining that we're talking about living on, sleeping on floorboards here and stuff. Really, if we want to have a rich future that does include a lot of material comfort, we're going to have to organize our society in a way that really pays respect to the resources with which we are going to create those comforts. And along the way, make sure that basic needs are taken care of so that people don't work for pointless reasons, doing things that waste the phenomenal power of the human brain that might be out there curing cancer tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that what you said about wants is so important. My parents are a perfect example of the fact that my dad could care less about having a really nice car. He could care less about having, the newest cell phone or name brand clothes or whatnot. He's the happiest when he makes wine and when he's making his wine and then his friends are over and they're trying each other's wine and they're drinking and they're socializing. He could care less about that other stuff. And I always wonder, I'm like, I wonder how much of that has to do with the fact that he was raised on a farm till, his early 20s when he came to the States, and really was kind of and even when he came here, he didn't really he didn't understand English anyway, so he couldn't, the commercials didn't really do much for him, and so he didn't really have that brainwashing of selling you image and selling you what's important and status and all that stuff. And I wonder how much that had an effect on it. I forget who I think I watched a documentary or if it was a podcast, who knows where I heard this, but about a family that they didn't let them watch any TV and they only let them watch Netflix and stuff that they could control, and their kids could go buy a Mickey D's, go buy a McDonald's, and basically to have no effect on them. And then their friends' kids would go crazy, like, oh, I need McDonald's. It's not because the food's good. The kids don't want to go there because they have this amazing burger that kids just enjoy and appreciate. It's because it's marketing, and the movie The Corporation is a perfect example of it. They go right into the psychology and all the statistics that they put together to kind of focus their marketing. And so it's well thought out, but it sucks because again, like we're not our happiest when we're on our phones or when we're whatever, we're happiest when we're communicating and we're around people and we're happy and we're smiling and we're laughing and we're telling stories, and doing these podcasts. That's what I love about these podcasts, because I get to meet cool people like you, have a conversation with them, and really how many people one, don't realize the enjoyment in it, or two, don't have the time for it, so it's just awesome to be able to do things like this. That's why I'm like a old dude. We go out to bars and I'll have a couple single friends chasing women, and I'll just sit outside with a cigar and a drink and get one or two of my friends that I know I can get in a deep conversation with and sit out there and talk about personal philosophies and whatnot. And that's when I'm the happiest. All that other stuff really isn't quite as important. So I think we definitely need to kind of look at what's important in life and what's our lasting impression and realize that to get back to the Zeitgeist movement and get to the to the message that we can't keep raping the earth and just assume we're going to figure it out later, and we have to look at things as, if we really care about. I mean, you talked about early in this podcast about seeing the earth from afar, and I've heard that theory too, the idea that you look at this little planet and you realize that every single revolution, every single evolvement of civilization, every single piece of history that we know of and that we don't know of has happened on this little planet, and from the Romans to religion being created to all these things like happen on this one little planet. And I think it puts things in perspective. You realize, like, holy shit, like this is, we care so much about these boundaries and flags and being patriotic, but none of that really matters. We have to look at, we live on this piece of earth and we can't just keep raping it. So
yes, in fact, you're essentially quoting Carl Sagan from Cosmos, and it's no accident that Cosmos has been rebooted by Neil deGrasse Tyson right now, right after Occupy, right when there's a demand. You know why? And I think it's not fanciful to say this. The generation that grew up and saw Cosmos, which is essentially our generation and ever so slightly older, Well, we're old enough now to be able to put into sensible and coherent words the demands for why nothing was done with Carl Sagan's worldview. And we want some fucking answers. And we're not going away until we get them. And if you can't provide them, then you automatically disqualify yourself of a person of any meaningful importance. And we got some fucking building to do, man. We have a society to knit together in a sensible, cohesive way.
Yeah, Carl Sagan. Everybody always talks about him provoking, people liking science, but he had so much more to him than just that. I mean,
He's a big marijuana fan, by the way.
people would
He's a big
think
weed smoker.
people are gonna start thinking I am. I always say this on his podcast. I'm like, everybody probably thinks I'm the biggest pothead, and I'm just like a closet, smoker who is always telling people, oh yeah, weed this. But I just think that the idea, of marijuana is the fact that it's a medicine that's been suppressed and can help many people. And when you see people with Crohn's disease or having seizures, and knowing that this plant could help them, but it's all political bullshit. The reason why you can't get to it is insane. And I think it's a perfect example to how fucked up the system is. And also I think that, I actually, I've never, like I said before, I have never done any psychedelics, and I haven't smoked weed since I was probably like 15 or 16. But, as I get older, I contemplated a lot more, the experimenting with DMT and stuff, because you get people like Bill Hicks and like I said, Graham Hancock, and these people who really seem like they it helped them with their perspective on things, and so it just it's interesting to think about, as an adult, and using it probably for the right reasons, because if I was young, I'd probably just put on some music and just trip out for no reason. But as an adult, I probably would use it to try to, I guess, expand consciousness or self-reflect a little bit. So, but yeah, well, we've been talking for quite a bit, Ben. I don't even know what time it is there. What is it? It must be in the AM now.
It's now 10. It's 10 to 1. Yeah.
But yeah. You said you didn't know if you're gonna have much energy. You have more energy than me.
I think we managed to do quite well, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
We're sitting on almost 3 hours here. I
Yeah,
think that's quite good. I think your poor listeners are probably sick of hearing this English snotty voice talking. So I will thank you in advance already. And is there anything else you want to touch on? Or
I think we touched on a lot of stuff, and actually it was cool because, like we said before we went on the air, like just. It's cool because you never know where these conversations go, and it's fun to hit on all these topics. And usually I write down a couple notes and never get to any of them. I think I got to some today just because of the fact that it was 3 hours, so I was bound to get to something. But it's I just really appreciate you being with us. Hopefully we can have you on again and expand on it, and definitely check out the book. Which is the Zeitgeist Movement, Movement Defined. Check out the films if you haven't yet, and also Ben will probably reappear in some more documentaries, and if you haven't seen Owned and Operated, it's a great documentary. Ben and I are both fans of it, and definitely check it out. It's a great film, and you'll see Ben in there, and any stuff coming up, and that's right. If you heard us talk a lot about Enter Shikari. If you like punkish, metalcore, hardcore, electronic music, definitely check it out. And they're one of the few bands and architects that have music with a message and have something to say, and aren't just doing a bunch of corny love songs. So what do you have coming up? You got any appearances or any lectures or anything coming up that you want to?
Yeah, there are a couple of bits and bobs coming up. So I'm doing the audiobook for a book that was written by a member of our movement called Robots Will Steal Your Job, but that's okay. So I'm doing an audiobook for that. And then I'm also going to do, once I get the chance, the audiobook for the Zeitgeist Movement Defined as well. So I've got to read that stuff out too. And then I've got a lecture coming up in June, I think on the 28th, in Austria, during which I'm going to lay down our worldview in the home of Mises and Hayek and all the rest of it. So that's going to be pretty interesting. Other than that, we're kicking out the radio shows at the moment, usually one every 2 weeks. At the moment, it's one a week. But that we get at least one done every 2 weeks, and there's more of that stuff coming too as well. And then ultimately, there's going to be a Zeitgeist Media Festival in at least in Los Angeles. There are sympathetic events around the world, but because it's so expensive, it's actually really hard to do. But we plan to do one of those. I'll certainly keep you in touch on that, and I'll of course gladly be a guest on your show again. I think it's wonderful. I think your focus is really decent, and I think the guests have expressed themselves from Rushkoff through to Mr. Camp, who I've been lucky enough to meet twice. They've all been really great, and keep doing it, man. It does have a ripple effect.
Yeah. I'm trying to do my part just like you, and I definitely, again, you're obviously doing something because I end up hearing about you from seeing your name pop up and seeing interviews with you and stuff. So I know you definitely got my attention, and so yeah, definitely keep it up. I mean, it's awesome that you're out there and you're spreading the word and you're willing to talk about it. And I think that that's important, that you're willing to talk to anybody about it, and you're willing to see all perspectives. And I think that the good thing about you being a spokesperson for the movement is the fact that you don't come off aggressive, you don't come off, you're willing to talk to people who don't necessarily agree with you, and I think that that's a really good thing. I think that it's important to because really we should all be doing that. We should always listen to all perspectives, all opinions, and don't just, because what ends up happening is if you only listen to people that agree with you, you don't progress at all, So I think it's important.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. In fact, I've been saying recently that I think what the coming era is, what's most promising about the coming era, is that it essentially befalls to all of us to become public intellectuals in the way that it used to only be for the elite. We now all have to become real, what we call nodes of data relay. Really starting to think out loud, teaching out loud, or rather learning out loud, as I call it. Where the act of you learning produces media that informs others, and so on and so on. So, become a public intellectual. You have the right to do it. Take yourself seriously. It's what Jeremy Scahill said, who created Dirty Wars. Somebody asked him once, well, when did you decide to become a journalist? He said, the day I started taking myself seriously. And I recommend you and your listeners and anybody else who fancies to hear this, take yourself seriously, man. Become the public intellectual you so evidently are with that astonishing brain of yours. And, produce some culture. Fight back. It's great.
Yeah. And the thing is, we live in a world today where we can be self-made intellects. I mean, not me, because I'm an idiot, but, for the most people, for people who are a little smarter than me, they can, they can go out there, they can read books, they can get information, they can see lectures online, and I reference Michael Sandel a lot on this podcast, because he was when I never went to college. I went right out of high school. I started working, and we started the family-owned business. But it was always it was fun because he put a whole semester online, and he teaches philosophy at Harvard, and it was awesome because he believed in this open source idea of like education should be open to everybody, and he put his whole this whole semester online, and I watched every single episode, and I loved it, and I'm like, this is awesome, this is cool what he's doing. So and it's cool times that we live in, the fact that we can get that type of information when somebody paid a whole lot of money to take that class. So
Absolutely.
so it's definitely awesome times, and like you said, take advantage of it, learn, and hopefully we can go in the right direction, and we can all be a part of what I think is becoming a mental awareness of how the world's run and what's going on. And again, I hate using the word because some people overuse it, but it definitely seems like there's a sense of awakening. So that's, I think it's important that we're going in the right direction. I think it's, positive things. I guess, maybe me and Ben are just looking at things from glass half full, but I think that there is a sense of awakening, and I think people are becoming more aware of their surroundings and more open-minded to different ideas because of the fact that, in the UK, people aren't coming out to vote. In the US, people who were pro-Obama are starting to realize it was bullshit, and I think that it takes things like this to kind of let people know that, holy shit, none of this is meaningful, and they were just sold nonsense. So, yeah, definitely keep up the good work, Ben, and get some sleep, or it's already late. You might as well just start drinking. And
well, thank you very much. So I may take you up on that. But yes, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, and actually, yeah, keep me up on Los Angeles, because my girlfriend and I, we've only been to California once. We went to Napa Valley, and we've always been looking for another excuse to go to. We went to Napa for a wedding. A friend of ours from Australia, and got married with another friend that's from East Coast, from Massachusetts. So they end up meeting somewhere in the middle. So both families had to travel in California. So we're looking for another reason to go there. So yeah, that'd be awesome to if there's some type of a Zeitgeist get together there. I'd love to go there and meet some people and hang out. So definitely keep me updated.
I'll keep you up to date, definitely, sir.
Hey, awesome, Ben. Hey, enjoy the rest of your night, and keep in touch. I really appreciate your time.
Sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Talk to you soon.